Truth is something that exists in reality and corresponds to the real state of affairs, but sometimes it is difficult to accept the truth, and a person creates a lie, which sincerely begins to believe and convince others. 11 young men and 1 girl met in a hotel room to celebrate the new year. Strange collaboration, you will think, and you will be right. But wait. There is one fact that will completely change your opinion. The men at this party are all members of a sexual minority, which means that 12 friends just met to have fun and celebrate the year 2021. And indeed, they celebrated the new year very cheerfully, so much so that on January 1st, the company had to take the only girl to the hospital, where doctors declared her death. But who was she? How did she die, and was anyone charged in connection with her death? But that's all in order. Next, let's break down the past party almost minute by minute, see what happened on the fateful night, and you'll definitely understand why we started this story with the notion of truth. So on December 31st, 2020, in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, at the 4-star City Garden Grand Hotel, John Paul de Lucerne checked in at 11 a.m. Christine Dacera checked in later, and during the day, 9 other guys checked into room 2207 and room 2209, which were on the same floor. Hotel manager John Paul Kalili joined the merry company just after midnight. New Year's Eve night was all about fun, dancing, and alcohol, lots of alcohol. Rommel Galida woke up around 10 a.m. and noticed Christine sleeping in the bathtub. He covered her with a blanket and went back to sleep. When he woke up several hours later, he found her unconscious and beginning to turn blue. Christine was taken to the hospital by 3 friends and hotel staff, but upon arrival at the emergency room, doctors only pronounced her dead. The 11 guys with the only girl spent the entire night in the hotel room, and she was dead by morning. News headlines about the crime shocked the public. Everyone imagined the story the same way, because it was obvious what a group of young guys and 1 girl could do all night. But what really happened that New Year's Eve night, and from what Christine Dacera died, was to be solved by the investigation. Christine Angelica Dacera was born on April 13, 1997, into the well-to-do family of John Nestor Dacera and Sharon Rose Faba Dacera, and grew up in Barangay San Isidro, General Santos City. She grew up an outgoing, intelligent, and independent girl. Kristen was a loving sister to her 3 siblings, Monica, Chloe, and JJ. After graduating from high school, she moved to the larger and more promising city of Davao, on the shores of the bay of the same name. There she enrolled in university. Christine studied diligently, danced, modeled, and was active on social media. Christine was also the epitome of beauty and intelligence. In 2017, she graduated with honors from the University of the Philippines, Mindanao, in Davao City, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Arts with a major in Media Arts. The girl has been actively involved in modeling and theatrical performances. On August 5, 2017, she competed against 8 other contenders for the title of Miss Silva Davao 2017 at the New City Commercial Corporation Mall in Davao City. She came in 2nd place. In June 2018, she participated in the annual fashion show. From September 2017 to January 2019, she worked as a marketing consultant for Gaisano Malls in different parts of Mindanao, including Davao City, General Santos City, Tagum, Toril, and Digos. Christine's life has been colorful and fulfilling. In February 2019, her life's dream came true. She moved to Manila to start working as a flight attendant for PAL Express, a subsidiary of Philippine Airlines. Christine Dacera's last flight as a flight attendant was on December 28, 2020. Christine's death was immediately publicized, due to which numerous discussions and theories were formed in the community. Initially, the police suspected that Kristen was most likely abused and killed by a group of guys she was partying with on New Year's Eve. Even without autopsy results and a toxicology report, Makati City Police filed preliminary charges of assault and murder against 11 men. The Philippine National Police declared the case closed. Arrests were made with charges and identification of suspects. 3 of the party participants were detained after surrendering to authorities on their own. But the main answer to what really caused Christine's death was the forensic medical report. The autopsy of Christine's body was conducted in Pasay City at the Rizal Funeral Home under the direction of Forensic Medical Officer Police Major Michael Nick Sartiento. On January 3, 2021, the examination of Christine Dacer's body was completed, and a forensic report was issued which found that death was due to natural causes due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. However, it also mentioned bruises on the girl's right arm, right thigh, knees, ankles, and right foot, as well as a linear abrasion on her right thigh. Deeply healed lacerations and abrasions were also reported during the genital exam. The National Capital Region Police Department announced that a special investigation team had been set up to look into the case, but Christine's family was unwilling to accept the fact that a young, vibrant girl could die a natural death prematurely. At a press conference on January 5, 2021, Christine Dacer's family stated that they had seen the autopsy report that said she died of an aneurysm. However, they stated that the autopsy performed was incomplete and requested a second autopsy. The parents of the deceased have been trying to understand how Christine's aorta was ruptured. After all, the police and the Dacera family lawyer believed that the aneurysm was the result of assault or abuse, which means it was not a natural death, and the perpetrators should be punished. The prosecutor's office identified all of the 11 men who were with Christine throughout the night. Some of them were her co-workers. Other young men were friends of her friends whom Christine was meeting for the first time. It turned out that Christine was the initiator of this party. She had booked the hotel room herself a few days in advance and coordinated this party with her friends. Her mom, Sharon, was aware of her daughter's friendship with men and never opposed it. Since childhood, Kristen had found it easier to socialize and make friends with the male gender, so it was considered normal in their family. In addition, she and her friends usually did not go home for vacations, so it became a tradition for them to meet each other every year. Kristen was able to call her family just after midnight to inform them of the ongoing celebration at the Makati Hotel and to wish her family a happy new year. During the video call, the family could see Kristen's friends and the surrounding festive environment. However, there has been new speculation about the abuse allegation, so in the case, the main evidence of the incident became the frames of the video from the hotel lobby, the study of which helped the police almost minute by minute to reconstruct the picture of what happened. It should be noted that the party was to be held in room 2209. It was this room and booked Christine Dacera. The main events begin to unfold in the late afternoon. At 11:21 p.m., Christine leaves room 2209 and goes to room 2207. At 11:38 p.m., the company returns to their room. Christine goes last. She is holding her shoes in a glass. At 2:50 a.m., Christine, holding the hand of a new acquaintance, Valentine, goes to room 2207. While they are at a neighbor's house, a hotel employee brings an extra mattress to room 2209. At 2:52 a.m., Valentine accompanies Christine to her room. Valentine's gait shows that the girl is already quite drunk. Her gait is too relaxed, and she is holding a bottle in her hand. The friends stop at the door, and Christine suddenly kisses Valentine, but the man quickly pulls away, after which the couple goes inside. At 3:15 a.m., Christine hurriedly leaves her room and goes to her neighbor's room, and 6 minutes later, one of the guys leaves there. He heads to room 2209, presumably to call his friends. At 3:22 a.m., Christine Dacera can be seen chatting with another man in the next room on the right side of the hallway, while 2 other men walk past them. She looked upset. Suddenly, Christine hugs one of her friends, and then they disappear from the view of the cameras altogether. At 4:13 a.m., John de Lucerne can be seen carrying Christine back to the first room. At 4:22 a.m., the camera again captures Christine at the door of room 2207. It's unclear what brought her there again. She practically falls off her feet, and a guy who looks like John de Lucerne picks her up by the waist and carries her to room 2209. Christine looks pretty drunk. At 5:05 a.m., the camera captures Christine laughing as she runs away from a guy who looks like Louis de Lima. Afterward, they're standing outside room 2207. Christine looks normal, and with him she enters room 2209. At 6:23 a.m., Christine makes her last appearance on camera alive. For the last time, Valentine carries her in his arms from room 2207. The girl is conscious. It was obviously an eventful night, but the most important truth still remains behind the scenes. The party continued until dawn. Around 12 noon, when Christine was found unconscious in the bathtub, her friends carried her to the floor and repeatedly attempted cardiopulmonary resuscitation. After unsuccessful attempts, they called for help at the front desk. A few minutes later, the hotel manager and the head of security arrived in the room. They used a wheelchair to lower Christine to the first floor of the hotel. Rommel Galido accompanied Christine to the hospital. The doctors unfortunately only stated the girl's death. Rommel called Christine's mom and broke the bad news. It can be assumed that what is happening really looks like a fun party, and definitely to be in one room such a large company was cramped, so young people chaotically moved all night from room to room. But the investigators had suspicions about the use of illegal substances to enhance the effect of alcohol. When questioned, some of the detainees claimed that there were no illegal substances during the party, but only whiskey and tequila. It is worth noting that illegal drugs were initially the centerpiece of the investigation, as the testimony of one of the detainees reported that Christine had doubts about the contents of the drinks and suggested that someone may have spiked it with an unknown substance. It transpired that guests were asked to bring their own food and drinks. Because of this, there was speculation that Christine Dacera's drink was poisoned and could have triggered the aneurysm that eventually led to her death. But the autopsy report stated that no alcohol or illegal drugs taken the night before her death would cause this type of aortic dilatation or defect. Substance information was later unconfirmed, as no illegal substances or traces of them were found in the room or in the suspect's personal belongings. An examination and search of the two rooms, as well as the neighboring room 2009, looking for potential evidence, did not yield the desired results that at least indirectly proved the violent death of Christine Dacera. Under questioning, Mark Rosales and John de la Serna publicly admitted their unconventional orientation and stated that Christine was their best friend and they would never hurt her. John also revealed that they had to bring Christine back from room 2207 because she was already vomiting early in the morning. Rommel Galido said that around 10 a.m. he found Christine in the bathtub of their room and thought she was asleep, so he just covered her with a blanket. However, around noon, after he woke up and went back to wake her up, he realized the girl was blue and not breathing. He rushed to his friends for help. The hotel advised that she be rushed to Makati Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead on arrival, reportedly due to a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The hospital reported the death to the Makati City Police. Meanwhile, other men from a neighboring hotel room had left by then. On January 4th, the Philippine National Police sent a separate statement to the media about the Christine Dacera incident, saying that the case is almost solved despite some missing details and conflicting reports on the matter. Police Chief Debold Sinas said they already have 3 suspects, and they have been apprehended. Other suspects were being sought. But as early as January 6th, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office ordered the release of the 3 men who were in custody due to lack of evidence. Prosecutors insisted that the evidence presented was insufficient to establish that Christine was abused. They also said that even if Christine Dacera was abused, the police have yet to prove that this is what caused her death. Moreover, the party was a gathering of men of non-traditional orientation where they were all flirting with each other, and Christine was an extra woman. Rommel Galido, as well as most of those present at the party, were stewards and co-workers of Christine Dacera at PL Airlines, indicating that she was well acquainted with these men and their orientation. On January 13, 2021, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office launched a preliminary investigation and based on an official autopsy that confirmed that the 23-year-old died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The prosecutor's office also called on the police to release the results of the victim's DNA analysis, toxicology report, and histopathic study. However, Christine's mother, Sharon Dacera, criticized the report that her daughter was not abused. She appeared on a news show where she claimed that her daughter was abused by a group of guys. If you see Christine's body, if you're a mother, you'll probably feel the pain that Christine suffered because of them. But my daughter can't talk anymore because she's dead. The woman spoke out on the TV program. Sharon cited the lacerations and bruises on her daughter's body, which were not recorded in the autopsy, as evidence that the report was inaccurate. Christine's family later said they wanted another autopsy to challenge authorities' initial findings that she died a natural death. The basis was injuries and bruising that were not documented in the first report. Family spokesperson Brick Reyes said that the injuries on the victim's legs and arms, as well as her remains, would provide sufficient evidence that Christine was abused. Brick Reyes also said that they believe the young woman was drugged and abused before she died. Christine was already intoxicated and complained that something seemed to have been spiked in her drink during the New Year's Eve celebration. Christine's parents said they have filed a complaint demanding the immediate dismissal of Michael Nick Sarmiento for gross negligence and gross incompetence in preparing Christine's forensic report and death certificate. Dr. Marissy Ramos, a friend of Dacera's family, told reporters that the body was subjected to a second autopsy. He also emphasized that the biological fluids recovered from the second autopsy have been forwarded to the Death Investigation Unit, which will provide more details after a final evaluation and consolidation of all the findings of its forensic team. The pathology autopsy results from the Southern Police District Crime Lab Division's forensic report, which was eventually shared on social media, showed that the cause of death was consistent with what was previously reported as a ruptured aortic aneurysm. The official autopsy revealed that Christina was not abused on the night of her death. The actual cause of Dacera's death lies in the aorta. The constant increase in blood pressure in the aorta caused the defect to weaken, and eventually the aorta ruptured, the Philippine National Police Crime Lab report said. At the time the aorta rupture occurred, there was blood loss, so Christine felt various symptoms such as weakness, nausea, and sweating. The blood loss due to the aortic rupture killed her within a few hours, the report said. This means that the girl had a ruptured aortic aneurysm, which enlarged the lower part of the main vessel, aorta, that supplies blood to the entire body. This vessel runs from a person's heart through the chest and abdomen. Since the aorta is the largest vessel in the body, if it ruptures, a person can lose a huge amount of blood and potentially be fatal, as in this case. In addition, it was noted that Christine's aneurysm did not occur recently. It started a long time ago. The report states that dilatation is a chronic condition and was present long before her death. Had she not died that fateful night, she would still have died in any scenario that would cause her blood pressure to rise enough to rupture the aneurysm. The autopsy also revealed that Dacera's heart was enlarged compared to a healthy heart, further confirming Christina Dacera's undiagnosed hypertension. For the most part, it can be confirmed that the girl's death was due to natural causes. But the widespread misinformation brought shame and persecution to those 11 young guys who were at the party and sincerely tried to give Christine first aid, but they were labeled as criminals. All 11 guys who were charged preliminarily have since been released from custody. The Makati City Prosecutor's Office tried to rectify the situation and said that at the time of the publicity, the evidence presented was not enough to establish that Christine Dacera was abused, and it was impossible to obtain proper evidence at that time. Therefore, they had to build a version based on signs of deterioration of the victim's body. In addition, 2 other suspects said that the police forced them to give false testimony that there were illegal drugs at the New Year's Eve party. Another participant in the story explained his kiss with Christine, which was captured by surveillance cameras on the eve of her death. According to the man, it was Christine herself who initiated it. He, however, tried to push her away. Law enforcement officials were criticized for not conducting a thorough toxicological examination when the flight attendant's body was found. The charges against the men were later dropped due to lack of evidence. The death of Christine Dacera attracted widespread media attention as a result of suspicious circumstances that seemed to contradict the findings of the Philippine National Police. Christine's case continued to receive a lot of publicity online as further developments came from her family, who in no way could accept the truth and believe in the natural death of their daughter. The girl's mother, Sharon, appealed to President Rodrigo Duterte for help in seeking justice for her daughter. "I am an ordinary person. You also have a daughter. I want to speak out openly because I don't want anyone to be victimized by the kind of cruelty and barbarism like my Christine." Christine Dacera was buried at Forest Lake Memorial Park in her hometown of General Santos, more than a week after her death. A wave of condolences, reposts, and farewells traveled across the social stanzas of Kristen's friends and co-workers. Ultimately, the unconventional case of Christine Dacera serves as a prime example of when the media spreads misinformation and how it can affect the public as well as impact those involved. As we come to the end, the story wants to return to the truth, which sooner or later, but in any form, is bound to take its place of honor. After all, the truth is one. But Christine's family is still convinced that the girl was killed by these people and that there is something secret in this story. Personally, I do not understand and found no answers to the question about bruises and wounds on Christine's body. Why was it hushed up? It seems that despite the presence of wounds and bruises on Christine's body, the cause of her death was not them, but the rupture of the aorta due to heart disease, so they did not focus on the wounds on her body. In my opinion, there are a lot of oddities and inconsistencies in this case, but you guys are the judge. I would like to wish Christine's family to accept the irreparable loss, because young guys, whether they are guilty or not, will end up remembering the same sad story every New Year's Eve and making excuses for the rest of their lives. Ryan Smith was born in 1975 in San Diego, California, USA. From a young age, he was an adventurous adventurer, passionate about traveling and getting to know different cultures around the world. This passion to discover the diversity of people through customs, languages, and tradition, and prompted Ryan to immigrate from his country. At the age of 27, this young man sought to get acquainted with the life of the countries of Eurasia, especially those that belonged to the collapsed Soviet Union. So in 2022, Ryan went with his backpack and dreams in tow to remote Azerbaijan, one of the countries of the former Soviet Union. The country, surrounded by the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, is located at what can be considered the crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia. So, for a young traveler, it was an ideal starting point for the world he intended to discover. Ryan settled in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, where he studied the language and culture. On his web portal, he described how at that time he worked at a carpet market surrounded by a walled city, and this allowed him to get acquainted with one of the oldest and most valuable craft practices in the region. The methods of making carpets are passed down from generation to generation, and it can be said that this is a tradition that has almost disappeared over time. The young designer was impressed by the beauty of the products and thought about the business associated with the manufacture of handmade carpets. In December 2005, Ryan, mindful of his idea, returned to the United States to lay the foundations of the project. While on American soil, he met a young and attractive teacher, Laura Joy, with whom he got engaged, and then married her. Laura supported her husband's hobbies of travel and foreign culture, and in 2011, the couple visited the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, which borders Azerbaijan. In Georgia, in the city of Marneuli, young people got married, and both intended to establish the production of traditional carpets there. The couple had a son in 2014, whom their young parents named Caleb, and at the same time Ryan and Laura were promoting their long-awaited handmade carpet weaving project. The project, developed by an American using traditional Azerbaijani methods, everything made using this technology could be sold on the international market for more than $1,000. While Laura worked as an English teacher at a local public school, her husband toured the villages of the region in search of weavers willing to work with them. To his surprise, Ryan did not find many masters using traditional methods. Some of those who first joined the plan refused to cooperate for various reasons. Some did not agree with the prices that Ryan offered, while others were not familiar with the original designer and were not sure they could produce what the brand needed. Ryan said in his blog that he spent 4 days in Kosalari, and it was there that he found artisans interested in his project. Ryan's goal was not only to make a profit or to save the development of an ancient culture. He was also interested in becoming something of a public benefactor, attracting women in rural areas who know ancient weaving techniques to his project, giving them the opportunity to revive the craft that would allow them to support their families. Soon, Ryan and Laura Smith became one of the most respected, and the visiting American considered a city with a population of no more than 20,000 people to be the most expensive place for himself. His wife, Laura, became close to the city, with its residents engaged in teaching, made many friends, while Ryan, promoting the value of the ancient carpet weaving culture, earned respect. Most residents considered the Smith couple kind and honest people to whom they could turn for help. A couple of visiting Americans got so used to the local society, traditions, and culture that in 2012 they applied for citizenship and soon became citizens of the United States and Georgia. It was rumored that the couple planned to build a kindergarten with a playground on their own money. But it was at a time when the couple had already decided that they had finally found a home, realized that the future of their family was promising. A tragedy knocked on their doors, and all their plans collapsed in the most unexpected and nightmarish way. In July 2018, 43-year-old Ryan and 42-year-old Laura planned to take a couple of days off to enjoy a vacation next to little Caleb and get away from the routine. Sabina Talibuba, Laura's friend, said that Laura called her on Wednesday, July 4th, shared her plans to go to the mountains, and warned them that they would be gone for 2 days. The couple chose a small, picturesque place hidden from the eyes near the Gudori Mountains as their destination. This area is known for its trails, beautiful waterfalls, and stunning gorges, ideal for relaxing walks and picnics in nature. In this secluded corner, instead of being distracted and finding peace of mind, the Smith family experienced their worst nightmare. Ryan and Laura were looking for a local resident who would serve as their guide so that they could not get lost, and calmly, without fear, traveled in mountainous places. And the parents were also concerned about the safety of little Caleb. I would like the journey not to be exhausting and uncomfortable for the baby. So they met with a local shepherd, Malchus Kabauri, who, although he did not live in this area, but, despite the young age of 19, knew the neighborhood well, because he traveled around them daily and grazed herds of sheep and goats. Malchus was distinguished by a calm character. The locals considered him a good guy. Confident in the positive reviews about Malchus, who knew the area, the Smith family hired him as a guide. It had not been long since their departure to the mountains when the couple found out about Malchus's dark intentions and claims. As it became known later, the group went out on the mountain, and having reached the clearing, set up camp for dinner. They chose a place near one of the many springs in the area to have fresh water quenching their thirst in the summer heat. Obviously, at some point Ryan paid attention to his guide, because he felt that he was not careful enough with the gun, which he always carried with him. There was a heated discussion between the two men, and no one expected Malchus to point a gun at Ryan and shoot him in the head. Then he fired another shot at the man in the back. Laura's terrified screams and the baby's crying drowned out the echoes of gunfire, rumbling in the mountains, but the worst was yet to come. Despite the woman's pleas, Malchus put the muzzle of the gun to Caleb's head and fired at point-blank range. Frightened and unaware of what had just happened in front of her, Laura turned to stone, but when she saw Malchus's cold gaze, she understood his true intentions. Her instinct for self-preservation worked. Laura ran as fast as she could to avoid the fate of her husband and son. But when she reached the edge of the waterfall cliff, she realized that she had no way out, and there was no way for her to escape. The shepherd used a weapon to force the woman to violence, and then allegedly pushed her off a cliff. Laura's body fell on the bank of the waterfall. According to the subsequent investigation, Malchus took Caleb's body and buried it in a secluded place, sending the murder weapon there as well. Then the shepherd returned to the village as if nothing had happened. Laura's friend Sabine began to worry when, after 3 days, Laura did not return from a family trip. Sabine tried to call Ryan or Laura, but she never got an answer. Ryan's entourage was also confused, as it was very unusual for him to be away for so long without contacting anyone. On Friday, July 6th, the Center for Rapid Response and Emergency Situations received a message about the possible disappearance of a Georgian family of American origin in the mountains. The caller was Sabine, who said that the Smith family had been in the mountains for more than 2 days with their little son of 4 years old, and they could not be contacted by phone. A team of 15 rescuers was sent to the gorge to search, where presumably a family was missing. Upon arrival in the designated area, rescuers found Laura's belongings and car, but moving further along the route of the small group, the searchers found a terrible find. A lifeless body lay at the foot of the waterfall. Confused rescuers stepped up rescue efforts and expanded the search area. A human corpse was found about 800 meters from the waterfall. The humidity and heat inherent in the season accelerated the decomposition of the body, so the initial report of the authorities was that the victims showed no signs of violence. In accordance with the Criminal Code of Georgia, an investigation was launched, but nothing was known about the couple's child yet. It took another 3 days when the fate of the defenseless baby became clear. Investigators managed to find out that Malchus was the last person with whom the family communicated. A 19-year-old shepherd was detained and told during interrogation that he knew where Caleb was. 4 days after the Smith family went to the mountains, Malchus led investigators to the place where he buried Caleb, as well as the weapon. The next day, the Georgian police released a statement saying that a young shepherd, Malchus Kabauri, had been taken into custody, and he was accused of murdering the Smith family. The news of the murder of a married couple and their son shocked Georgia, especially Marnuli and the community of weavers. The American consulate also expressed its alarm over this crime. In fact, the FBI team participated in the investigation together with the Georgian authorities and cooperated in the search and processing of evidence. On July 11th, the Tbilisi Municipal Court decided to place Malchus, who pleaded not guilty to the charges, under arrest. The conductor claimed that the real killers of the family were 2 foreigners who arrived in a black car. Allegedly, these people killed the Smith family, threatened to kill him and his family if he reported to the police, and left Malchus alive so that suspicion of a triple murder fell on the shepherd. Violence against Laura was rejected by Malchus's lawyer, because according to the guy, he was not capable of such a thing, since he was a virgin. On July 12th, family, friends, and activists of public organizations gathered in front of Ryan's house in Marmilli with toys, flowers, and lit candles to express condolences and remember the victims. The next day, Malchus's lawyer confirmed the innocence of the accused. He continued to claim that the crime was committed by 2 foreigners, and that the psychological pressure exerted on his client forced Malchus to initially plead guilty. But evidence against Malchus began to appear one after another. The most convincing evidence of Malchus's guilt was the autopsy report of the victims. It was found that Ryan's body had 2 gunshot wounds, one in the head and one in the back. Caleb was shot in the head at point-blank range. In Laura's case, violence against her was proven, and DNA tests confirmed that the biological material found in her body and on her underwear belonged to Malchus. The DNA of Ryan and the defendant were also found on the murder weapon. In addition, a technical examination conducted by the FBI on the phones of the victims and their alleged killer showed that there were photos of Laura's lifeless body at the waterfall in the memory of Malchus's phone. The shepherd even showed them to several local acquaintances, to whom he said that he had accidentally stumbled upon a corpse while walking through these places. Experts found in the search history and the phone that a few days before this incident, Malchus had visited various sites of an intimate nature. All this led investigators to the conclusion that the motive of the crime was the young man's interest in Laura, and that his actions were deliberate from the very moment when the Smith family contacted Malchus to take them to the waterfall. After the release of the autopsy results, Malchus's lawyer, David, resigned, saying that for reasons of principle he could not defend the shepherd. David was replaced by another lawyer, who from that moment led the case. He insisted on the client's innocence and filed a motion to withdraw Malchus's previous confession. The shepherd's mother, Mariana, supported her son and agreed with the lawyer that the police may have forced the guy to confess to the crime under threat of imprisonment. Relatives of the suspect claimed that because of a high-profile crime, the authorities accused Malchus in order to close the case. However, on November 9, 2018, Malchus was charged with the murder of 3 members of the Smith family. He was also charged with additional charges of violence against Laura. The psychological examination conducted on the young shepherd showed that he is sane, healthy, and ready for trial. The term of pre-trial detention expired on April 9, 2019, but the prosecutor said that Bay had strong evidence of Malchus's guilt and that he would be punished for such a terrible crime. A meeting of 12 members of the court on March 25, 2019, unanimously ruled that Malchus was guilty of premeditated murder with extreme cruelty of more than 2 people. He committed premeditated murder in order to conceal another crime, namely intimate assault. On March 27, 2019, the judge of the District Gorey District announced the decision to sentence to life imprisonment. While the relatives of the criminal protested against the life sentence, which they considered unfair, the sentence became a relief for friends and relatives of the Smith family, and defense lawyers announced that they would appeal the verdict to the appellate instances in connection with alleged procedural violations. The U.S. consul in Georgia said that the verdict provided justice for the Smith family, adding that the evidence left no doubt about Malchus's guilt. Since the arrival of Ryan and Laura Smith in Georgia, these people have won the love and respect of the residents of Marnooly, and their brutal murder has dealt a blow to the community that the couple chose as their home. The community project developed by Ryan not only revived an ancient tradition, but also provided many women with a source of income and stability. The death of the spouses plunged into sadness and uncertainty dozens of women who aspired to a successful business. Shortly after the terrible events that claimed the lives of the founders, the project was revived by foreign investors who support Ryan's ideas and offer opportunities for local craftsmen. Ryan and Laura left behind the world they knew in the West, hoping to discover cultural treasures, and while they were greeted by grateful members of the community, their fate crossed with a sinister creature who hid his essence behind the guise of a kind shepherd. Wedding travel, or as it is also called, honeymoon, an event is definitely important in the life of a young family. It can be a bright impressions received from an unforgettable adventure, or for example, a long-awaited vacation from boring life, somewhere on the Azure coast under the shade of palm trees. But what about when you go on your wedding trip only to commit a real crime, or not to commit it, but only to be accused of it? Would the honeymoon be as bright and carefree in such a case? I don't think so. Unforgettable, of course. Isabella Rodriguez, hereafter Hellman, was born in 1975 in Colombia. It is a country where everyone speaks only Spanish, but Isabella literally dreamed the American dream. She bought books in English, listened to songs on the radio, and all just to learn the language, and as soon as possible to leave to conquer the northern part of the continent. However, the language to learn Isabella succeeded, but the southern accent remained with her forever. But this did not prevent the young woman to move to Florida, get a job there as a real estate agent, and help in renting or buying homes like her people who speak only Spanish. In 2002, Isabella, although not to say that she was lucky, but still married William Hellman. And despite the fact that the couple lived in marriage for 10 years, their entire union, a series of continuous quarrels and domestic disputes. Finally, when the patience of the spouses finally burst, they filed for divorce. The divorce process lasted a very long time, as long as 2 years. During these 2 years, Isabella even managed to find a new man, with whom, as it seemed to her, she will certainly find happiness. The new lover's name was Lewis Bennett, and he was from Great Britain. As a child, his family moved to live in Australia, thanks to which Lewis received dual citizenship and was able to return to his native country and graduate their quite prestigious Canbourne School of Mines. But Lewis never managed to work in his specialty. It is impossible to say whether this is good or bad, because just a couple of years after graduating in the UK, he returned to Australia and opened his own solar panel manufacturing company. And it is worth noting that it was quite successful, because just 4 years later, he was able to enter the American market. And in view of the fact that his main office was in Florida, the young and promising Lewis began to look for a wife there via the internet. It would seem that today, it is easy to get acquainted with someone on the internet, and much easier than to do it in person. But Lewis had no luck with this for a long time. He flipped through the profiles of women, not even paying much attention to them. Those who wrote to him first either scared him off or did not arouse his interest. But when he saw Isabella in the photo, she seemed to him a copy of Jennifer Lopez, and he decided to write to her. It should be noted that they corresponded for quite a long time and very often. Isabella told him about how she always wanted to move to America from Colombia, how long she had been learning the language, how she was looking for a job, and finally, she even confided in him and told him about her past relationships. Bennett was not at all embarrassed by this, especially since Isabella and William's divorce is only a matter of time. As for the young woman herself, she was apparently tired of past relationships and the long divorce, which ate up all the inner strength. She herself took the initiative to meet in person and began to come to Lewis wherever he was, whether it was England, Australia, or even Thailand. And Lewis, trying to strike his new lover, bought a catamaran on which he planned to travel the Caribbean Sea with Isabella. It was his childhood dream, because of frequent moves, quickly find new friends could not manage and had to spend his free time reading adventure books such as Jules Verne or Louis Stevenson. Yes, Bennett has noted that Treasure Island was his favorite book, perhaps for good reason, and it would still play a role in his life. Isabella spent all her free time, whether it was vacation or a long weekend, traveling with Lewis, and she noticed that during these expensive trips, Bennett practically forgot about work. Yes, of course, it could be reduced to the fact that all the processes in his company were so automated that he could live for himself. But nevertheless, Isabella was alarmed. She even once tried to talk to her lover on this topic, but the man either joked away or in full earnest said that he got a huge inheritance and nothing to worry about. Isabella was satisfied with such an answer. In July 2016, the couple had a joyful event. They had a daughter. For Lewis, as well as for Isabella, it was the first child. The girl they named Amelia. And here the young parents began the first disagreements, which Isabella, because of the past sad experience, experienced extremely hard. They could not decide how right they should bring up their daughter. Then, in what country the daughter would be better to grow up. Lewis insisted with all his might that Amelia grew up in Australia, next to his parents, and Isabella, on the contrary, did not want to go anywhere from America. Finally, the young father gave in, and in 2017, the whole family moved to Florida, where they, despite the already born daughter, decided to finally get married. Isabella begged her, now husband, to go on a honeymoon as she hoped that this sea voyage would bring them back to the state when they first got to know each other and carefree sailing around the islands on the high seas on his catamaran. Lewis heard his wife's whims and promised her that there would definitely be a honeymoon, but a little later. And Lewis wasn't lying. In late April 2017, he returned from Australia and the couple headed out on their romantic cruise. Yes, at first, judging by the posts on social media, everything was indeed as Isabella wanted. In all the photos, they are smiling, clasping each other in their arms and traveling around the Caribbean islands. However then, after those endless honeymoon photos, a lull began. A long one, for 2 weeks. When Isabella reappeared online, she told her family that she and her husband were in Cuba and were planning to return to Florida, but didn't know which way yet. She also added that they have a very bad connection here, so in the next few days, they may not expect a call from her. On the night of May 15th, the Coast Guard received a call for help from Lewis. He said he was alone on a raft in the open sea. Rescuers immediately went in search of him. The man was found near the Bahamas, and he was indeed alone on a boat that was filled to the top with various things and provisions. On the shore, Lewis told the following story. On May 14th, after a tiring day, he asked Isabella to give him a few hours of rest and, entrusting his wife with the management of the catamaran, went to take a nap in the cabin. Lewis was awakened by a heavy thump from below, and he called out to his wife, but she did not respond. Then he went upstairs, looked around, and realized that Isabella was nowhere on board, and the very blow that had awakened him had created a hole in the bottom of the catamaran through which water began to enter his vessel, and the boat began to sink. Lewis decided that his wife was simply carried overboard by the blow, and since she was wearing a vest, she was fine, and in order not to go to the bottom with his child, he gathered all his belongings and moved to the rescue boat. Meanwhile, the rescuers, having taken a look at the contents of Lewis's life raft, were surprised, as the man took only those things that belonged to him, as if he had no hope that his beloved Isabella was alive and would soon be found. He even brought his tea set with him. Also in his backpack were found aluminum tubes, inside which were hidden silver coins, but this discovery was not paid attention to because it was necessary to move urgently to search for Isabella. The Coast Guard used absolutely all the equipment they had, including helicopters, and surveyed the entire area, but all to no avail. But they found the very catamaran, which, according to Lewis's statements, crashed on underwater rocks, but there were no underwater rocks or reefs in the vicinity. Nor had the boat itself gone completely to the bottom. It was decided to inspect the boat. For this purpose, several divers were sent to it. Again, the results of their examination did not coincide with Lewis's story. As I said earlier, there were no underwater rocks at the wreck site. The boat simply could not have collided with anything, and the holes that were on the bottom were made from inside the boat, not outside. Another literally shocking oddity in this case was that the boat had all the escape hatches open, which of course increased the rate of sinking of the catamaran, and Lewis mentioned in his story that he left the boat over the side, as he was supposed to. The fact is that escape hatches are strictly forbidden to be opened, and they are needed only when there is no other way to leave the sinking vessel. Also, Lewis, being an experienced seafarer, did not use a beacon or satellite phone, which would have helped rescuers to find travelers in time in case of disaster. That is, from the outside, it looked as if Lewis deliberately sank the ship and made it look like an accident. But then, where is his wife? On May 17th, the search for Isabella continued, although 120 hours had passed since the catamaran wreck, while the possibility of finding a woman alive in the middle of the open sea is only 13 hours. On May 18th, the search stopped. Isabella has not been found to this day. Lewis himself returned home on May 15th, as if he wasn't really worried about missing Isabella, and what's more, he bought just one ticket to Australia for May 19th, so he didn't even hope that the rescue team would be able to find his wife, dead or alive. But he tried his best to get his wife's death certificate as soon as possible so that he could get the insurance he was entitled to as a close relative. This was denied. After the insurance company refused, Lewis visited Isabella's parents and tried to take his daughter away from them. They blamed him for Isabella's death and did not want to give Amelia away. He was able to take his daughter only after calling the police. On May 28th, he left Amelia with his parents in the UK and returned to Florida to try again to get the insurance payment, which by law was entitled to him. To the police, Lewis's behavior seemed extremely suspicious. They were literally sure that he was to blame for his wife's disappearance, but they had no evidence. Even the catamaran on which the murder could theoretically have taken place, and on which it was possible to find evidence confirming it, had gone to the bottom, to a great depth, and it was impossible to get it out of there. But the search of the house where Lewis and Isabella lived, as well as Lewis's own cell phone, proved fruitful. Yes, the fact that the husband and wife could not communicate with each other for weeks, and the husband himself could periodically disappear from home and not appear there for a long time, is not considered any evidence. But the fact that in the house were found recording devices on which Isabella recorded constant threats of her husband already pushed the investigation to the idea that not everything in their relationship was smooth, because judging by these records, Lewis repeatedly promised to kill his wife. Isabella even told her friends about it and shared with them that she wanted to leave her fierce husband and cruel tyrant, but only try one more time, now the last, to save their relationship. But as we already know, she never succeeded. The main reason for quarrels were debts Lewis: real estate, electricity, credit cards. He literally drowned in debt, and get out of this pit, it seemed impossible. Moreover, he did not try to solve his problems, but only continued to travel on his catamaran, still did not work anywhere, and in addition spent some of the rest of his savings on such things as Thai boxing lessons in Thailand. Of course, Isabella didn't like it, and in the meantime, Lewis even forced his wife to give up child rearing and get a job so that she could pay off his debts while he was doing more important things. Looking into Lewis Bennett's debts, the investigation also found that between 2014 and 2016, the man engaged in international transfers totaling about $160,000. As it turned out, the very coins that rescuers found in Lewis's backpack were very rare and collectible. Later, the investigation will establish that the coins were stolen in 2016. One of Lewis's acquaintances, who at that time was a member of the crew of the ship Kitty, and when the crew went to town, this acquaintance stole the coins and gave them to Lewis for further resale. Yes, it was for smuggling that the investigation managed to put Lewis behind bars, because during a search of the house, in addition to those tape recordings, the police found some of the coins. For smuggling, Lewis received 7 months in prison. There, while behind bars, the man also received a second charge, just for the involuntary manslaughter of his wife. The investigation carefully checked all the facts that they had on their hands, in which they so scrupulously collected piece by piece, and came to the conclusion that during their trip, Isabella found in her husband's things those very collectible coins, and between them there was a scandal. But it was not entirely clear whether Isabella had been killed on the boat or in the water. During the quarrel, quite fiery and somewhere even cruel husband could either not calculate the force of the blow or throw the woman into the water and then do not provide her with any help. And so Isabella drowned while her husband watched her torment, being on board. During the tragedy, Lewis realized that his wife's death was a good thing for him, and if he made it look like a sinking boat accident, he would get an additional payout for the sinking catamaran in addition to the money for Isabella's death, since it was also considered an insured event. But only the whole story on the part of the prosecution was just a fantasy of the grief-stricken relatives. Lewis was never charged with premeditated murder. For lack of evidence, he was offered a deal that if he pleaded guilty, he would only get 8 years. Lewis accepted. But should he have agreed to it, if he really is not guilty, and all the evidence against him is only a tape recorder where he threatens his wife? Isabella's relatives were of course furious at this verdict, but also realized that otherwise Lewis Bennett would serve the rest of his time for the smuggling article and be released very soon. In November 2018, Lewis Bennett received 8 years in prison, and all of the insurance payments and all of his wife's assets, which he had claimed, and for which he had arranged all of this, will go to Amelia. Also, the court ordered Lewis to pay monetary compensation to his daughter, who has yet to experience such serious psychological trauma as she grows up. Inevitability. When one person goes missing, it's always a tragedy for their family. But imagine the horror that befalls the loved ones if an entire family disappears. And if there are children involved, the grief is indescribable. Matters concerning the life and health of children are always perceived with a special sensitivity. They are innocent from birth. Unfortunately, there are times when these little angels suffer and bear responsibilities just as adults do. A complicated situation unfolded in the fall of 2013 in Deltona, Florida, USA, involving the family of Yesenia Suarez and Luis Toledo. The 28-year-old mother vanished along with her children, 9-year-old Thalia and 8-year-old Michael Otto. Law enforcement officers began the search and investigation into the disappearance immediately. However, the clues discovered soon left the seasoned officers astonished. What happened overnight from October 22nd to October 23rd is shrouded in mystery and defies all logic. Disappearance. The next morning, Felicita Perez, the mother of the main character, waited for her usual call. Yesenia called her every day between 8:30 and 9 a.m., but this time there was no call. The elderly woman grew concerned, as such behavior was out of character for her daughter. Over the next 2 hours, she tried to make contact, but all attempts were futile. The mobile phone of the person being called was turned off. Felicita then called the school where her grandchildren attended. However, the administration informed her that the children had not arrived for classes. The mother's concern grew. Around 11 a.m., she decided to visit Yesenia's home, but nobody answered the door. After this, the worried woman sought help from the police. The compelling arguments she presented convinced the officers to respond to the message. Upon arriving at Yesenia's residence, police officers began inspecting the house and the surrounding area. Soon after, 35-year-old Luis, the husband of the missing woman, arrived. He seemed surprised to find law enforcement at his home and initially expressed indignation. However, once he learned the reasons for their presence, he softened. During the conversation, the man mentioned that he last saw his wife and children the night before. After a minor argument, she packed some belongings and left, saying nothing to him. The family was on the verge of divorce, so after another quarrel, he spent the night in the car. By morning, the house was empty. Toledo stated that he was deeply saddened that after years together, his wife did not even bother to say goodbye. His words were credible. He also gave permission for a search. Inside the home, except for scattered children's toys, everything was orderly. No signs of forced entry or struggle were detected. It seemed quite possible that the young woman left at the first opportunity along with her children. Also missing were her second car, a 2013 Honda Accord, as well as her personal items, documents, and mobile phone. Nevertheless, there were elements that raised concerns. Firstly, Suarez was very close to her relatives. Therefore, she would not have kept them in the dark and would have informed them of her plans or current whereabouts. Secondly, a peculiar smell lingered in the house, especially strong in the bedroom, bathroom, and the hallway leading from it. At places, the smell of cleaning products mixed with the scent of vinegar. This led detectives to two conclusions. Either the homeowners were exceptionally clean, or someone was attempting to destroy evidence of a crime that had occurred there. Thirdly, Felicita's account raised suspicions. She had previously told the police that on October 22nd, a terrible argument occurred between Yesenia and Luis, during which he showed aggression and struck her daughter. Finally, neighbors of the couple, who had gathered at the arrival of the police, reported strange noises coming from the house under investigation. Witnesses explained that they heard something resembling a scream around 2 a.m., but did not attach any significance to it. Altercations among teenagers in this area were not uncommon. Therefore, only when law enforcement arrived did they realize that something extraordinary had happened. On the brink of collapse, subsequent investigations shed light on the details of the argument mentioned by the mother of the missing woman and her children. Luis suspected his wife of infidelity and had installed a tracking program on her phone. This led him to discover an affair between Yesenia and her colleague, Kevin Dren. On October 22nd, the distraught husband confronted his wife at her workplace, publicly accused her of infidelity, and slapped her. He then declared he would not hinder the lovers further. During the conflict, one of the organization's employees called emergency services to report the incident. However, Toledo left the building before the police arrived. The officers interviewed Suarez, who admitted that she often experienced such uncontrollable behavior from her husband, but had never sought help. Her statements were documented and recorded. After work, Yesenia visited her mother's house, where her children were waiting. They had dinner together, after which Toledo called her. Felicita recounted hearing about their conversation. Luis apologized and pleaded not to press charges against him. He also warned that something unpleasant might happen if she did not comply with his demands. It turns out the protagonist of the story had decided to obtain a restraining order against her husband. But after the call, she changed her mind, explaining to her family that it would only make things worse. Late in the evening, Toledo came to his mother-in-law's house and spoke with the women. He was distraught, complaining that his marriage was falling apart. He expressed his love for his family and his desire not to lose them. Yesenia, however, was determined and declared that a divorce was imminent. After this, he left. To give him time to cool off and come to terms with the new reality, the woman initially decided to stay overnight at her parental home. Nevertheless, after meeting with her husband, she took the children and returned home. Unfortunately, this was the last time the mother saw her daughter and grandchildren. Arrest. Due to the incident at Suarez's office the day before and her subsequent disappearance, the police had solid grounds to arrest Luis. The man was shocked and appeared bewildered. At the station, he reiterated his version of the events that happened overnight. After arguing with his wife at her mother's house, he went to a neighbor's place, where he stayed until 1 a.m. He then decided to spend the night in his car to avoid further conflict. At 7 a.m., he returned home and found that no one was there. Despite this, the suspect remained calm and did not express any concern for the missing individuals. He explained this by his confidence that they would soon return or make contact. He claimed Yesenia was not the kind of person who kept others regularly informed, and the current situation was just a foolish coincidence. A love story. Yesenia and Luis met in 2009 during a street festival. They were immediately attracted to each other and quickly fell in love. However, their relationship was anything but harmonious. Everyone around them was convinced that the two were not suited for each other. Suarez had been through a failed marriage before. At 24, she found herself a single mother of 2 young children. Thus, she was determined to set up their lives in the most favorable way possible. She dreamed of providing them with a good education and a better future. To this end, she re-enrolled in college and took up a full-time job. Yesenia worked for an American canine detection service in Lake Mary, a company known for training dogs to work with military and police forces. Luis, in contrast to his partner, was older and just beginning to sort out his life. He had been convicted multiple times in the past and was a former member of the Latin Kings gang. Thanks to his disposition and well-honed fighting skills, he had once held a leading position within the group. However, after turning state's evidence and betraying his peers, he lost his former influence and respect. Therefore, Toledo left the gang, turned away from his criminal past, and enrolled in college for barber training. He even got baptized and started attending church. Luis emerged as a sociable and caring person who tried to help everyone. After meeting Yesenia, he transformed completely. He became a loving and tender partner to her and a caring stepfather to her children. All the neighbors spoke highly of him. They often saw him spending time with his family and playing with the kids in the yard. The young couple got married on the first day of 2011. Although their relationship was initially happy, over time everything changed. Respect and understanding faded away. Luis began to spend a lot of time on video games and neglected his family duties. It seemed all his attention had shifted to the virtual world. His wife repeatedly expressed her grievances, but the situation would only improve temporarily. Felicita often visited the couple since she lived just a few blocks away. Therefore, she was well aware of everything happening in her daughter's life. Gradually, the number of arguments in the family increased. Toledo genuinely did not understand what was expected of him and why they couldn't live as before. One day, he became so angry that he physically lashed out at his wife. After this, their marriage began to crumble. Eyewitnesses. After Luis was detained, detectives began interviewing relatives and acquaintances of the missing family. They also contacted Yesenia's lover, Kevin. He reported that he had spoken with her late on the evening of October 22nd. He called to check on her, concerned that she might be in trouble after the incident at work. During the conversation, Suarez seemed tense, but she assured him that everything was fine and that it would just take some time to settle down. Sometimes her voice sounded unclear, which made him think that she might have had a drink. Their conversation lasted about 5 minutes. At the end, Yesenia wished him a good night and said goodbye. It was clear that Kevin did not know where she was and was genuinely worried that something irreparable might have happened to her. Later, a call came into the police station from Jackson Titian, a neighbor of the suspect. The young man lived with his mother across the street and had inadvertently witnessed the events unfold. He reported that at 6 a.m., Luis came to him asking for help with a task. He needed to pick up a neighbor on his way back from Lake Mary, but he did not explain why. Meanwhile, Toledo got into Yesenia's car, leading the student to assume that her vehicle needed repair and they were heading to a garage. However, the reality was different from what he had imagined. They drove for about 30 minutes and then stopped in the parking lot of a large supermarket. Luis got out and started cleaning the interior of the car. Jackson noticed how thoroughly he wiped down the cabin, all the doors and windows, using a cleaning agent. Afterwards, he put the car mats, a rag, and gloves into a bag and then disposed of the bundle in a trash container. At that moment, the eyewitness did not understand what was happening and felt mixed emotions. He began to suspect that something serious had occurred the night before. Yet, on the other hand, if Toledo was hiding something, why would he take him along? After leaving Yesenia's vehicle, the men headed back. This time, Louise drove while Tishan was sent to the back seat. The ride back to Delton was silent. Unable to bear the tension, Jackson finally asked what had happened. The neighbor simply replied that he had lost his temper and refused to explain further. The incident occupied the 20-year-old student's mind all morning, but after hearing rumors about the family's disappearance, he pieced together the events and immediately called the police. Later, the young man was questioned in the office and confirmed everything he had said on the phone. He then directed law enforcement officers to the location of the sought-after vehicle and the container where Luis had discarded the items. Armed with Jackson's testimony, detectives summoned Toledo. Everyone hoped to see Yesenia and her children alive, so they hoped the alleged criminal would confess sooner rather than later. Therefore, they informed him of everything the neighbor had reported and asked him to comment on these statements. However, the suspect suggested that the law enforcement officers were bluffing and refused to engage in conversation. Investigation. Detectives knew that solid evidence was needed for substantial accusations, so they didn't rush things and instead headed to the parking lot. The sought-after car was indeed there, but it was empty. However, Yesenia's personal belongings were found inside: her purse, Idaho card, wallet, work pass, and mobile phone. Forensic experts examined the vehicle for DNA, blood, or fingerprints, but were unable to find anything conclusive. The experts stated that this was because the car had been cleaned thoroughly. Later, it was discovered that the garage keys still bore a single fingerprint, which turned out to be the suspect's. In the trash bin that Tishan had pointed out, they found a bag containing cleaning supplies, a rag, and some clothing. Additionally, bloodstains were found on the discarded mats and men's shoes. A wet shower curtain and the same cleaning products were then found in a container near the couple's home. When the house was thoroughly inspected, it was difficult to find any traces. However, experts were able to find a few stains in the bathroom. Blood spatters were found on the cabinet doors and on the floor under the bathtub. DNA analysis determined that they belonged to Talia and Michael. After this discovery, the lead detective expressed doubt that the missing persons would be found alive. Nevertheless, the search continued. The operation involved relatives and acquaintances of Yesenia, as well as numerous volunteers. They searched everywhere, using dogs and divers, but to no avail. It became obvious that the only person who could give any information was Luis, but he continued to remain silent. Confession. Eventually, during the third interrogation, Toledo cracked and confessed to Yesenia's death. However, he continued to deny that he had harmed the children. He recounted that Jackson Tyshawn had come over to his house in the evening to play video games. Suddenly, his wife and children appeared on the doorstep. She no longer liked his games and was even more upset by the events of the day, so she demanded that they leave. But when Luis refused, Yesenia walked up to him and started shaking him by the shoulders. To make her stop, he punched her in the neck. Unfortunately, he didn't calculate the force and the blow proved fatal. She couldn't breathe. I could see her gasping for breath and I couldn't do anything to help. She ended up dying looking at me. The suspect finished his story. The detective then provocatively asked, "Do you miss your children? Would you trade places with them?" Toledo nodded silently. The investigator then asked him to explain how they died. The suspect's behavior changed, and he stated that they were massacred by a neighbor who was present. After Yesenia's death, Talia and Michael ran into the room. They saw their mother lying on the floor and began screaming. Luis therefore asked Jackson to take them to another place. However, he soon heard loud noises and followed them into the bathroom. When he looked inside, he saw that they were lying on the floor and the neighbor was holding an axe. Luis burst into tears. The man added that after the incident, he was in shock and lost all self-awareness, and Jackson took advantage of the situation and got rid of the bodies. There was silence in the interrogation room. The last hope of finding the missing alive was gone. All that remained was to find the bodies, but the likelihood of finding them was rapidly diminishing. The detectives doubted the man's sincerity. Nevertheless, his claims had to be verified. So Jackson Tycon was questioned again. He was immediately told the neighbor's version of events. The young man stated that after returning home from college, he never went out again. He also noted that he had no reason to end the lives of Yesenia or Michael and Talia. Moreover, he personally went to the police and reported the incident. Soon his alibi was confirmed. He was cleared of suspicion and released home. The desire to end it all. The search for Yesenia, Michael, and Talia continued relentlessly. Despite considerable public attention and the large number of people involved, the efforts were unsuccessful. Every neighborhood was combed, including woods, bodies of water, and local landfills, all to no avail. Detectives feared that without the bodies, there might not be enough evidence to convict. However, something unexpected soon happened. During one of the routine interrogations, Toledo asked to use the restroom. Accompanied by several officers, since the restroom was at the other end of the building, they had to walk a short distance. During this walk, the detainee asked for a favor. He wanted to be taken home so that he could end his life. Understandably, he was not released. Instead, Luis asked the officers to remove his handcuffs so they could shoot him as if he were trying to escape. This bizarre request was also ignored. In response, one of the officers asked where his family's bodies were. Toledo muttered that he would never reveal that information. When the detainee entered the restroom, he managed to close the door behind him. Soon, there was the sound of breaking glass. It turned out that the suspect had broken the mirror over the sink and used the shards to slash his wrists. He was clearly determined to end his life and was doing everything he could to do so, but it was unclear what was driving him. Was it guilt and remorse for what had happened, or fear of the punishment awaiting him? Later, he did give an explanation for his actions. The policeman broke down the door and pulled out the bloody man, whose devious plan had failed. He received timely medical attention, and his life was not threatened. However, the detainee's behavior revealed much. It turned out that he feared retaliation from his former colleagues, who traditionally had an unkind attitude toward those who harmed children, unlike their attitude toward unfaithful spouses. Luis realized that if he ended up in prison, he was in for a rough ride. His past convictions when he turned in the Latin Kings leaders and the new murder charges would weigh heavily against him. This was confirmed by the contents of his letters sent during the investigation. In one of them, he expressed his desire to tell the whole truth, but could not, as it would be used against him. He reminded everyone that Yesenia had been unfaithful to him, and added that he would never harm the children in any way. "I love them more than anything and continue to love them to this day," he wrote. On October 28, Luis was charged with Yesenia's murder, and the following January, with the murders of Michael and Talia. The prosecution did not rule out that a third person was involved in the crime and helped the accused dispose of the bodies. Given his past criminal experience, Toledo also knew how to clean up a crime scene professionally on his own. Justice has been served. The trial of the man took place in 2017. The prosecutor argued that the accused committed the crime out of jealousy. However, he did not confess to ending the lives of Talia and Michael, since there was no justification for such actions. Therefore, Luis came up with an absurd story involving a neighbor. Kimberly Lasanta, Toledo's sister-in-law, testified in favor of the prosecution. She told the court that because of numerous threats from him, she obtained a restraining order against him. She claimed that Luis had previously sent her text messages threatening to take the children and send someone to harm her. At trial, She testified to her constant fear of him and produced the saved text messages. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to incriminate Jackson Tycon, resulting in a lie detector test and searches of his home and car, though nothing incriminating was found. That day, Jackson was indeed troubled by Luis's erratic behavior. Luis looked tense and scared, but Jackson didn't bother to get to the bottom of it because he couldn't imagine the horrible events that had transpired. Felicita and the children's biological father attended the trial. Relatives of the victims seemed overwhelmed with grief and were almost ready to confront Toledo in the courtroom. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found the defendant guilty of second-degree murder in the case of Yesenia and first-degree murder in the case of Talia and Michael. Luis was sentenced to 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. Interestingly, he initially asked for the death penalty, explaining that death row inmates do not face other inmates, and therefore he would not face retaliation from former gang members with whom he was once associated. The defendant knew that there was a bounty on his head and that he would suffer for the rest of his life. Everyone but the defense was convinced that Toledo had no remorse for his actions, but was simply afraid of what awaited him after the trial. The relatives of the victims were satisfied with the verdict. Outcomes. It is known that Yesenia and her children were active members of the Spanish-speaking Seventh-day Adventist Church community in Deltona. The mother was studying at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. In spring 2014, she was expected to graduate with honors with a bachelor's degree in human resources management. After her disappearance, the college posthumously awarded her the degree. As of April 2024, the convicted Toledo continues to serve his sentence. He claims that he did not interrupt Talia and Michael's lives and does not know the whereabouts of their bodies. In one of the letters written from prison, he appears to have coded the message, writing that he sent 3 boxes, 1 large and 2 small ones. The large package reached its destination and the 2 small ones were fine. He added that he cared about what happens to him next, but he was innocent of the charges against him. Perhaps in this way, he wanted to let his acquaintances know that his conscience was clear and he should not be punished. Nevertheless, the evidence was against him. Even the fact that he had previously served 4 years for burglary, robbery, and kidnapping spoke volumes. It is possible that he did lose control of himself and committed inexplicable acts. Experience shows that those who embark on a criminal path rarely get off it. The dark secrets of a rich and happy family. It's often said that great wealth can corrupt even the best of people, but in reality, that's not entirely accurate. Wealth simply amplifies the existing negative qualities in a person, providing a sense of impunity and permissiveness. While the absence of money is certainly not pleasant, it's important to remember that banknotes, jewels, and figures on bank accounts, by themselves, cannot bring happiness, especially if they were obtained through dishonest means or at the expense of someone else's life. The case of Sereda and Leon Britz in 2020 shook not just South Africa, where this dramatic story unfolded, but also the entire world. The investigation promised to be challenging, with an innocent individual initially becoming the main suspect. It wasn't until an unexpected and heartfelt confession emerged that the true perpetrator, who had the least malice towards the victim, was identified. Now, let's delve into the complicated scheme from the beginning, where money became a stumbling block in what many considered to be a large, harmonious family. The Britz family. The Britz, a family of European immigrants, settled in the early 1970s in the small but cozy town of Pofadder, located in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. Despite its modest size, this town is an important economic and tourist hub in the region known as Bushmanland. It's also worth noting that the surrounding landscapes are incredibly picturesque, attracting biologists and researchers with their diverse flora and fauna. In 1976, the Brits had their first son, whom they named Toki, and in 1979, their second son, Leon, was born. Even by local standards, the family was considered quite affluent. The family patriarch owned what was arguably the only major hotel in the area, which eventually grew into a comprehensive hotel and restaurant complex. Both brothers excelled in school. were active in sports and, thanks to their parents' efforts, received prestigious educations. After completing his studies, Toki left his hometown while Leon, who had been helping his parents and learning the intricacies of the hotel business from his teenage years, decided to stay to eventually take over the reins of management. He was intelligent, attentive to detail, and possessed a so-called entrepreneurial vein, enabling him to manage affairs effectively. The story of Cinderella. At the hotel complex owned by the Brits family, various events, parties, and celebrations were often held. At one such event, Leon noticed a young beauty among the guests. A slender brunette with green eyes and a captivating smile caught his eye immediately. The young man decided to approach her and introduce himself, only to find out that she was just 14 years old and she was in school, though she appeared much older. This fact deeply unsettled Leon, who was already 25 at the time, but he still decided to invite the beauty for a dance, and afterward, they spent about an hour chatting while sitting on the terrace. The schoolgirl's name was Sureta, and from that very first meeting, Brits couldn't stop thinking about her, constantly dreaming of their next encounter. But let's delve a bit into who this enchanting young stranger was. Sureta Kerr was born on September 6, 1990, the youngest of 3 children in a family of immigrants from Eastern Europe. Her family lived in poverty, and her parents had been teetering on the brink of divorce for many years, exacerbating the already difficult situation. When the youngest daughter was only 9 years old, the head of the family tragically died from a venomous snake bite, leaving the mother alone with 3 children, barely making ends meet. All the Kerr children had to work to survive, making Sureta's childhood a difficult period filled with hardships and deprivation. But then, a wealthy suitor suddenly appeared in her life, ready to lay the world at her feet. Due to her young age, the girl didn't understand how to react to the attention from an adult man who was 11 years older than her. Leon seemed genuinely in love. He sought any excuse to meet with the girl, picked her up after school, took her to popular restaurants, bought expensive gifts, fashionable clothes, and tried to please her in every way possible. Sureta received things she had always been deprived of, and luxury literally went to the schoolgirl's head. She understood that with this man, she could build a family, and neither they nor their children would ever want for anything. The girl's mother, despite her daughter's young age, approved of the relationship. Leon seemed to her a reliable, decent, and kind person, and no one doubted the sincerity of his feelings. However, the young man's parents were very worried about his romance with her, as such relationships, if they went too far, could be considered a criminal offense. But the young man insisted he was willing to wait until his beloved turned 18, after which he would officially marry her. Unexpected pregnancy. About a year into their relationship, 15-year-old Sureta realized she was pregnant. She was hesitant to tell anyone, knowing that the news would not please either her mother or her lover. The girl began to wear baggy clothes to hide her changed figure and became withdrawn and uncommunicative, but she could no longer keep everything secret and decided to confess everything to her partner. The news of the impending addition was a shock to Leon. He understood that she could not only tarnish his reputation, but also lead to serious legal problems. The closeness between them had been initiated by him, and now he could be accused of seducing a teenager, which he couldn't allow. First, the man paid for a visit to a private clinic, where they not only confirmed the pregnancy, but also discovered that she was expecting twins. With the term approaching a critical point, Leon found a doctor at the same private clinic who agreed to terminate the pregnancy anonymously. Sureta was devastated and felt completely crushed, as her partner, who had promised to love and protect her, forcibly persuaded her to terminate their unborn children. However, Leon, being older, was able to pressure her and convince her of the necessity of the procedure. He promised that in the future, when they got married, they would definitely have children, but for now, it would simply destroy their lives and plans for a happy future together. The young woman had no choice but to comply, and she did as her boyfriend asked. She suffered from pain for several days after, but the physical discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of guilt and overwhelming depression. Sureta stayed in her room, cried constantly, and didn't know how to continue living with this. Her mother didn't show much interest in her condition, assuming her daughter was just upset over some argument with her boyfriend. But everything would pass once they reconciled. A couple of days later, Leon actually showed up at his beloved's doorstep and took her to the city to distract her, to walk in the park, and to browse through stores. He believed this would help her recover faster and lift her spirits. Sure enough, she soon managed to return to her previous life, but the feelings of resentment and distrust towards her partner lingered. Forced marriage. 3 years later, while the young woman was in her senior year of high school, she discovered she was pregnant again. At that time, she was only a few months away from becoming an adult, and this unexpected, delicate condition was not supposed to cause any particular issues. However, when she told Leon about it, he reacted very negatively again and insisted that his beloved terminate the pregnancy, arguing that they were too young to start a family. This time, Soretta firmly refused, stating that she would not do it and would keep the child, even if it meant raising it on her own. After some thought, Leon eventually made an official proposal, presenting her with a beautiful diamond ring. By then, their once tender feelings had considerably dulled, but this renewed promise and Soretta's ongoing pregnancy left him with no choice. By the time she graduated from high school, the changes in her figure were already obvious, and in the fall, as soon as she turned 18, the couple had a lavish wedding. The newlyweds appeared quite happy, but each had certain doubts about the correctness of their decision. A few months later, the couple had their first son, and 2 years after that, twin boys were born. The family lived in affluence, able to indulge in anything they wanted, and from the outside they looked successful, well-off, and happy. Family business. The business founded and developed over many years by Leon's parents was quite profitable. Over time, the man also started his own chain of stores and fast food eateries, and his ventures were on the rise, with the family business flourishing. However, from the mid-2010s, the family began to experience troubles and misfortunes. In 2014, Leon's father passed away suddenly due to long-standing heart issues, and his mother's health deteriorated from the shock of losing her husband. She soon showed rapidly progressing signs of dementia, forcing her sons to place her in a specialized clinic for necessary care and proper attention. Toki returned to his hometown after many years away to help his brother manage the business, and together they took over the operation of a hotel. At the same time, Leon decided to involve his wife in the family business, something she had long aspired to do. It was decided to register a mining equipment and tools store in her name. She dove into work while also continuing to raise their 3 young sons. Life between two cities. Brits, the eldest son, started elementary school in his hometown of Pofadder, but as the twins grew older, the parents faced the pressing issue of choosing a suitable educational institution for all their children. The challenge was that finding quality education in South Africa was not so straightforward. The spouses found a good school in the nearby city of Kakamas. The school was about 75 miles from Brits's home, but there was no need for daily travel back and forth. The couple decided to rent a spacious house in Kakamas, where Soretta moved with the sons, but Leon stayed in Pofadder as he could not leave the business and manage affairs remotely. However, the wife had to step back from managing the store, although she really enjoyed it and was quite successful at it. The woman dedicated herself entirely to raising the sons, and they only visited home to see their husband and father on weekends and holidays. Leon himself rarely came to Kakamas due to his busy schedule. Initially, it seemed that everything was in order, but over time, the spouses drifted further apart, and their feelings significantly cooled. Battle with a deadly illness. In 2018, Soretta started having health problems, which she did not take seriously at first. However, an examination revealed that the young woman had oncology and problems with the cardiovascular system. Soon, she underwent surgery to remove the malignant tumor and was prescribed a treatment course. Fortunately, all procedures were timely, saving the life of the mother of 3. But from then on, for prevention, She needed periodic therapy at a clinic in Johannesburg, which was quite expensive. The Brits family had the means, and Leon would never skimp on the health of his son's mother. Additionally, Sureta hired a nanny and a housekeeper who helped her around the house and looked after the children, which was essential when the woman went for treatment. By that time, the spouses had drifted so far apart that each essentially lived their own life. The young woman started an affair in Johannesburg, so when going for another course of preventive therapy, she would not stay in a hotel, but at her lover's place. Leon, apparently, also periodically had women, as compromising photos and messages found in his phone suggested. In fact, nothing but their 3 children bound the couple together anymore. Enemies and envy. The family issues did not affect the business, which continued to thrive. The hotel, stores, and restaurant chain were generating impressive profits, some of which Leon invested in real estate in major cities, earning a good income from rentals. Undoubtedly, their family was not only the wealthiest in Pofadder, but also among the most affluent in the northern Cape Province. Naturally, the Brits had many enviers and ill-wishers, whose numbers grew in proportion to the profitability of their business. Leon, his parents, and his brother regularly received threats and various demands. Leon himself often confided in his wife that he had long felt unsafe and feared that someone might try to take away his life's work. In each of Leon's offices, as well as at his and his parents' homes, there were safes and cleverly disguised hiding places storing cash in various currencies, securities, diamonds, jewelry, and gold bars. Sureta knew only about some of them, specifically those in their own home in Pofadder. Initially, the threats were a serious concern, but over time, as the man began receiving them daily, he simply stopped paying attention to them. He believed they were just attempts to intimidate him, as the ill-wishers had never tried to act on their threats. However, a tragedy soon occurred that ended Leon's life. Body in the pool. On October 7, 2020, Leon's wife called him and asked him to check on their dogs, which, according to a neighbor, had gotten out. Leon promised to call back as soon as he arrived and checked that everything was in order, but the return call never came. Concerned, Sureta called her husband's number several times, but no one answered. Leaving the children with the nanny, she drove to Pofadder. The front door was unlocked, but it seemed that no one was home. It was suspiciously quiet inside, and no one responded to her calls. She then went to the backyard, where she found her husband's body floating face down in the pool. There were wounds on his back, the water was tinged pink with blood, and it was clear that he was deceased. Panicking, Sureta called the police, the emergency services, and then dialed Toki, informing him of the incident. When law enforcement arrived, they immediately cordoned off the house as a crime scene. It was evident that the businessman's death was violent. The body had several stab wounds and signs of a struggle, and a safe in the house had been opened and its contents taken. An initial theory was that burglars had broken into the house, and the homeowner, returning unexpectedly, had caught them off guard, paying with his life. However, many other valuable items in plain sight remained untouched, suggesting the burglars had specifically targeted what was in the safe. Prime suspect. The murder of the successful and wealthy businessman quickly made a lot of noise, hotly discussed in the media and on social networks, generating numerous rumors, gossip, and speculations. Many knew about the long-standing threats against Brits and believed that competitors or ill-wishers had fulfilled their threats. However, the first and key suspect in the case became Toki, who had been managing the family business with his brother for the last few years. First, he had visited Leon shortly before the tragedy and was considered the last person to see him alive. Second, their mother was in very poor health, with doctors giving her only a few months to live, and her will, reportedly, was stored at the younger son's house. The prevailing theory was that the elder brother disagreed with the business mostly going to Leon and wanted to access the will to alter it. This explained why the other items in the house remained untouched. It was also suspected that he did not act alone, and murder was not part of the original plan. Toki categorically denied any involvement and stated that under no circumstances would he harm his own brother, especially since they had never had disputes or disagreements over financial matters. He sought support from Sureta, who asserted that she believed him and would help find the best lawyer to prove his innocence. Unexpected confession. For nearly 2 months, the investigation was at a standstill with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses emerging. However, one day, 35-year-old Jacques Van Vuren walked into the police station and offered to make a deal by pleading guilty and revealing all his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. It turned out that Jacques had once attended the same school as Sureta. They were friends, and he even had feelings for her, but she did not reciprocate and soon started a relationship with Léon. The former friends had not seen each other for many years, but one day they coincidentally met at a shopping center and started talking. At that time, Jacques was going through a tough period. He had divorced his wife, lost his job, developed a dependence on alcohol, and was in dire need of money. Sureta saw that her former admirer still harbored tender feelings for her, so she began to confide in him about her unhappy marriage. She claimed that her husband mistreated her, was abusive, but she could not leave him because he threatened to take their sons and leave her with nothing. This topic was painful for Van Vuren since his ex-wife had barred him from seeing their children after the divorce, and he genuinely empathized with Sureta and wanted to help. They exchanged phone numbers, and a few days later, Sureta, having devised a cunning plan, called her former friend and tearfully told him that her husband had beaten her. She said she couldn't leave him, and the only solution was to eliminate the tyrant. Sureta was very persuasive, and Jacques believed her. Moreover, she promised him 500,000 South African rand as payment, and he, as mentioned, was in desperate need of money. Jacques agreed to help Sureta, but he did not want to do the dirty work himself, so he decided to hire other people. The plan was developed in early 2020, but due to the global epidemic that swept the world, its execution had to be delayed. During this difficult time, the Brits' family business suffered colossal losses. A store and part of the restaurants had to be closed, and Leon wanted to sell the hotel, which his wife did not agree with. In late September, the conspirators returned to the original plan, but Jacques requested half of the payment up front. However, due to financial difficulties, Sureta could only withdraw 100,000 rand and also gave her accomplice her engagement ring. With this money, Jacques hired a friend named Enrique Williams, who had drug issues and was willing to commit murder for money. However, Williams was afraid he couldn't handle a grown, strong man alone, so he brought along his 25-year-old friend, Amantla Bareki, to share the fee. Sureta gave the criminals access to the house, informed them about the safe's location, and allowed them to take whatever they liked to make the robbery look more plausible. The only condition was that the dogs should not be harmed, so she let them out in advance. The neighbors saw this and called her, signaling that Williams and Bareki were in the house, after which she called her husband and lured him into a deadly trap. When the unsuspecting man entered the house, he was struck on the head with a baseball bat by one of the lurking criminals, and another attacked him with a knife, leaving him no chance. Leon was stabbed 8 times and hit with the bat a dozen times before his lifeless body was thrown into the pool. After opening the safe, the criminals found no money, only securities, diamonds, and gold bars. They handed over the loot to Jacques, who, in turn, gave everything to Sureta. The criminals decided not to take anything else from the house, fearing they would leave too many traces. They were only counting on the large sum promised by the client. Torment of conscience and fear of inevitable punishment. Jacques was not supposed to appear at the crime scene himself. Sureta feared he would be caught on surveillance camera footage and recognized, as Toki had seen him a couple of times and knew he was his brother's wife's school friend. He was only supposed to pass on the advance payment and instructions to the accomplices. However, Jacques was anxious to ensure everything went smoothly and drove past the Brits' house several times to make sure the perpetrators were in place and the victim had arrived directly to them. His car was captured on camera, and although the license plate was not clearly visible, The police were interested in the vehicle, meaning that finding its owner was only a matter of time. Furthermore, there was no money in the safe, and all the family's accounts were frozen during the investigation. Sureta had no way to pay the hired perpetrators, as selling diamonds, bars, or securities would expose her. She asked them to wait, but Williams and Bareki were not willing to wait and began to threaten Jacques. Desperate, Jacques had not received the money, was plagued by guilt, and his accomplices threatened to deal with him. He realized that he would end up either behind bars or follow Léon. Jacques shared his concerns with his sister, who told their mother, and together the women convinced him to voluntarily surrender to the police and reveal the other participants in the plot to secure a more lenient punishment. True motives of the mastermind. Jacques, in his full account to the police, believed he had done a noble act, as he saw Léon as a man who mistreated his wife, was abusive, and threatened to take away the children. However, it was actually Sureta who initially directed the police to consider Toki as the main suspect. Citing a will and property disputes between the brothers, the authorities decided to detain and interrogate the woman to uncover her true motives. It turned out that she and her husband had fallen out of love long ago, and each was living a separate life. Sureta had a lover in Johannesburg whom she wanted to join permanently. However, when she expressed her desire to divorce, Léon categorically refused to agree. He also threatened to leave her with nothing and take the sons if she decided to leave him. It's hard to say what motivated Léon, but it's likely he still had feelings for his beautiful wife and hoped to mend their relationship. Sureta, however, decided that she would inherit his money and business upon his death, which would allow her and her lover to live comfortably. She also saw an opportunity to rid herself of Toki by framing him, thus becoming the sole owner of the hotel, stores, and restaurants after her mother-in-law's death. Her plan might have succeeded if there had been money in the safe and she had managed to pay off the hired perpetrators. Trial and sentencing of all participants. The trial of the criminal quartet took place in the spring of 2021. Each participant's role in this high-profile case was considered. Jacques Van Vuren, who made a deal with the prosecution, told everything in detail and turned in his accomplices, was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The hired perpetrators, Enrique Williams and Amantal Bareki, were found guilty of premeditated murder with special cruelty and robbery. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for the widow who orchestrated the murder of her own husband, she managed to convince the court that she had been a victim from the very beginning of their relationship. She testified that Léon coerced her into intimacy when she was just 14 years old, and a year later, when she became pregnant, Brits, to avoid responsibility, forced her to terminate the pregnancy at a fairly late stage. In recent years, despite the disappearance of love, he refused to divorce her and threatened to take the children. Nevertheless, Sureta Brits was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole from the beginning of her term. The court considered her remorse and heartfelt confession, as well as her status as the mother of 3 minor children. However, 3 years after the sentence was passed, she remains incarcerated. Taking the life of one's children is not just a heinous criminal offense. Such a desperate step can be pushed by a woman's altered consciousness under strong substances, or by a painful psycho-emotional state, when the body cannot cope with stress. The high-profile case of Veronica Youngblood has become a vivid and horrible example of how disturbed psyche, unhealthy relationships, and constant stress can lead to irreversible consequences. Veronica committed a terrible crime, but at the trial, the young woman claimed that, despite what she had done, she had always been a good mother and wished her children only good. This story evokes both anger and pity, but to understand what exactly pushed Veronica to such a terrible and inhumane act, you need to look back a few decades and see what she had to go through. Perhaps her own childhood traumas played no small part in this, but this does not absolve her of responsibility. Veronica Youngblood's abusive childhood. Veronica Youngblood, maiden name Castro, was born in 1986 in the suburbs of Santa Rosa in central Argentina. She was the eldest of 2 daughters in the family and was raised with her sister Mara, who was born in 1988. The girl's childhood was poor and full of hardship, but not even hunger and lack of basic necessities was the worst. Her parents did not work anywhere, abused alcohol, and took their anger out on their eldest daughter, beating her almost daily, sometimes to such an extent that she could not walk. Grandfather also did not harbor any warm feelings for his own granddaughters, considering them extra hungry mouths that need to be fed. From an early age, Veronica got used to the fact that she had nowhere to wait for protection and support. She felt superfluous in her own family, and the only truly close person to her was only her younger sister. When the girl was 14 years old, her parents divorced and separated. Her father was not interested in the fate of his daughters, but her mother, who was actively trying to organize her personal life, did not need children. Veronica was forced to become an escort to support herself and her younger sister without any education because she saw no other way out. At the age of 15, she became pregnant, and at the age of 16, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter Sharon. She never gave her eldest daughter's father's name, and probably didn't know it herself, having gotten pregnant by one of her many clients, a follower of a strange cult. As a teenager, without support and help, the girl joined a rather strange South American religious cult called Umbanda. It was a combination of heterogeneous beliefs and cult positions, among which were the foundations of Catholicism, spiritualism, and African cults. In Umbanda, it is customary to honor spirit guides who are able to communicate with the souls of dead people. The followers of the cult also believe in reincarnation and spiritual development through various practices. Veronica, being an impressionable and driven girl, was quickly imbued with the peculiarities of this belief, and according to the memories of her younger sister, she herself began to believe that she could make contact with spirits and communicate with the dead. Veronica did talk about hearing voices and seeing dreams, and also believed that after death, the soul of each person is reborn for a better life. Most likely, such a specific religious cult was fertile ground for the development of mental illness, given Veronica's difficult childhood and her own parents' abuse of her. The other followers of the cult treated her with kindness and love, which is what she lacked the most, so she believed literally every word they told her. Moving to the United States, meeting Ronald Youngblood. When exactly Veronica decided to move to the United States of America, it is not known, but it happened in the late 2000s, when she was a little more than 20 years old. Taking her young daughter, she settled in Hampton Roads, in the state of Virginia. There, the attractive young woman took a job with an escort service company. In late 2008, Veronica met a guy whose name was Ronald Youngblood. He was a few years older than her and served as a pilot in the U.S. Navy. He and Veronica first met when Ronald used the services of the company she worked for. Apparently, Ronald was immediately attracted to this young person because he himself expressed a desire to continue to communicate. Soon he insisted that Veronica left the escort, after which they began to live together. And in 2009, in one of the chapels in Las Vegas, the couple officially legalized their relationship, arranging a modest ceremony without guests. After the wedding, Veronica's life became stable for the first time, and she was not afraid to look into the future and confidently made plans. She had her own home, a caring husband with a stable job, who fully provided for her, while Veronica could be engaged in creating home comfort. But most importantly, Ronald took her daughter Sharon as his own, surrounding her with care and love. In 2013, the couple had their common child, daughter Brooklyn. The couple was over the seventh heaven from happiness, and the eldest heiress was happy that she had a baby sister, Sharon Youngblood. After the wedding, Ronald gave Veronica and her oldest daughter his last name, although officially the child he did not adopt. Nevertheless, the girl called him Daddy and reached out to him. Ronald himself tried not to deny her anything, paid attention, and engaged in the upbringing of the child. Sharon grew up quite bright, sociable, and purposeful girl. She studied well in school, had a lot of friends, was active and friendly. From an early age, she was involved in sports, was a member of the school cheerleading team, played tennis. But the girl achieved the greatest success in figure skating. Coach, who worked with Sharon, noted how easy and at ease she felt on the ice, as if in his native element. In childhood and adolescence, she regularly participated in various figure skating competitions, where she repeatedly won prizes. She was prophesied a brilliant sports career, noting the tenacity and diligence of the young figure skater, but alas, it was not destined to come true. Unstable family life. After several years of living together, the relationship between Ronald and Veronica began to deteriorate. Both spouses had difficult characters. They were excessively emotional and unyielding. If at first they managed to find compromises, then now neither of them did not want to make concessions. Moreover, the spouses began to do many things to each other for evil, because of which between them often began to erupt scandals with violent clarification of relations, mutual accusations, and insults. In addition, Ronald was very jealous and overbearing. If before the wedding he promised to forget about what his chosen one used to do, now he reminded her of it, every chance he got. He said that he pulled her out of the mud, provided for her, took her child, and now he demands to live by his rules. Family quarrels began to escalate into physical assaults, with the husband and wife taking turns to be the instigators of the fights. The police received complaints of domestic violence from both sides, but in most cases, these reports were soon withdrawn, and the spouses continued to live together. To be fair, the children were not involved in their parents' squabbles and were never physically hurt, although their emotional state can only be guessed at. In 2014, Ronald was sent to Central America, to the Republic of Honduras for duty, and his family followed him. During this period, relations between the spouses became very acute. Veronica complained to the local police that her husband was raising his hand against her, restricting her finances by blocking her card and forbidding her to use the internet and car. Ronald later said in his defense that he did so because he found out that his spouse was cheating on him. The husband thought that by depriving his wife of money, personal transportation, and the ability to communicate with her lover, he would keep her at home. As a result, Veronica filed a complaint with the U.S. Embassy and had her husband extradited from Honduras and returned to the United States. However, this incident did not affect his career, and he was soon transferred to Washington, D.C. to the main department of the country's Navy. However, relations between the couple finally soured. Breakup and ongoing conflicts. In 2016, the spouses moved to Florida, the place of Ronald's new appointment. By that time, they had already virtually separated, but continued to live together under one roof, and Ron still fully supported Veronica and daughters. By the beginning of 2017, the family moved again, this time to the small town of Oakton, which is in the state of Virginia, where the spouses began the official divorce process. But even during the dissolution of marriage, Ron and Veronica did not separate. They lived in the same house, although apparently they simply could not stand each other anymore. Both later claimed that no matter what, they wanted to raise children together, but in fact, Veronica had no source of income and could not even rent a room for herself. The issue of future custody of the children became especially acute, and Veronica realized that she would not be able to raise the children on her own because they were all completely dependent on Ronald. He also realized this and did not miss the opportunity to remind his wife of this, sometimes descending to outright blackmail, which brought the young woman to hysterics. At some point, driven to despair, Veronica decided to take a loan from the bank to have at least some of their own funds. However, as a guarantor, she specified her still legal husband without informing him. When Ronald received a call from the bank, another scandal broke out. Naturally, he refused to act as guarantor, and the actions of his wife became for him another reason to humiliate her. True, a couple of months later, the couple was finally able to agree, and the scandals between them for a while subsided. According to the court decision, they could continue to live together, and together bring up their children, while neither of them will be charged alimony. But that truce didn't last long. In the fall of 2017, Ronald filed a lawsuit against Veronica, accusing her of aggressive and inadequate behavior. He stated that the spouse smashed his smartphone, launching it into the wall, drowned in a basin of water with a working laptop, and also smashed the windshield of his car with a stone. After that, Veronica was obliged to move out and forbade her to go near Ron. At the same time, The youngest daughter, Brooklyn, was temporarily given full custody of her father until the next court hearing. 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings were finalized, but having received a certificate of divorce, the former spouses began to live together again and, it seemed, even reconciled. Courts and custody battle. About 6 months later, the former spouses appeared in court together again, but this time they provided a multi-page agreement detailing their plan for custody of their shared daughter. All the matter is that Ronald was transferred to the state of Missouri and the former wife and children moved with him. But before Veronica wanted to officially settle a number of nuances regarding the custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The agreement stated that Ronald would provide his ex-wife with housing that would be close to his home so they could raise their daughter together. The court approved the document in April 2018, and the move itself was scheduled for August of that year. But a month later, Veronica unexpectedly changed her decision and went to court again. The young woman turned for help to a lawyer, who had to confidently draw up and make a number of changes to the previously approved agreement. Veronica said she was doing this because of changed circumstances. By then, she had finished her nursing school training and had been offered a job in Oakton with a good salary. That way, she could more or less support herself and the girls, and there was no need to move after her ex-husband. In addition, the new job promised to help her find and pay for her own place to live. Due to her new circumstances, Veronica now sought full custody of her daughter Brooklyn, which she specified in an amendment to the agreement. The new hearing was held in July 2018, a month before the previously scheduled departure to Missouri. But the court refused to make any changes to the previously approved agreement, and the former spouses were to move to another state to share custody of their shared daughter, as previously agreed. Veronica seemed to agree with the court's decision, as she made no further attempt to challenge it. 2 weeks after the last court hearing, Ronald filed a legal notice with his new address where he would live after the move, which was less than a month away. Only a few minor details needed to be finalized, and he was on his way. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but Sharon and Brooklyn had only days to live. Disturbing call. Toward evening, on August 5, 2018, emergency services received a disturbing call from 15-year-old Sharon. The girl was crying and gasping in pain. She begged to be saved and talked about how much she wanted to live. She said she was badly injured, and when the cameraman asked what had happened, she said she had just been shot with a gun by her own mother. According to Sharon, she and her younger sister were asleep when their mom walked into the room and shot Brooklyn. At the sound of the gunshot, the older sister woke up and was literally numb with fear. She asked her mom, "What are you doing?" Veronica replied that she was taking her daughters to God. Sharon tried to run away, but Veronica shot her in the back. With her last strength, she made it to the next room, where she locked herself in and called emergency services. The operator assured Sharon that help was on its way and asked her to hold on for a few more minutes, but then he heard the girl screaming in despair, followed by another gunshot. Then there was a frightening silence and the call was cut off. The police and paramedics arrived on the scene by 10 o'clock in the evening, and a horrifying picture was revealed before them. By this time, Ronald, who was on business in another city, had also called the emergency services, asking them to send someone to his house immediately because his ex-wife, according to him, might have done something terrible. Veronica had already called him and told him everything, but Ron refused to believe in the truth of her words. Sharon was the first to be found lying on the floor with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the back. Amazingly, despite the massive blood loss, she still had a faint pulse and was desperately clinging to life. Sharon was quickly taken to the intensive care unit of the nearest hospital, but despite the efforts of doctors, the next day, she died. Brooklyn's breathless body was discovered in her bedroom, in her own bed. She had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. The girl's father arrived about an hour later, rushing home as fast as he could. But Veronica's whereabouts remained unknown until the emergency services received another call from one Manuel Bellows, who reported Veronica's whereabouts. Who is Manuel? Manuel was one of the lawyers the young woman consulted with in the spring of 2018. regarding custody of her youngest daughter. Veronica, as the lawyer later argued in court, immediately struck him as a rather serious, collected, and responsible young woman fighting for custody of her beloved daughters. In addition, she was very attractive in appearance, divorced, and not in a relationship at the time. The two soon hit it off, quickly developing into a tumultuous love affair. Only a few months later, Manuel noticed some oddities in her behavior, which alerted him in particular. It was the religious views of Veronica and her frightening statements about the upcoming meeting with God. At the end of July, Veronica called Manuel and invited him to her home, saying that they needed to have a serious talk. When he arrived, the young woman was home alone. Her ex-husband and children were staying with Ronald's relatives. The lights were off in the house, but candles were burning everywhere, creating a romantic atmosphere, and there was a dinner for two on the table. She confided in him that she had lost the nursing position she had been looking forward to and had refused to move to another state because of it. Veronica also shocked her boyfriend with the news that she was pregnant by him. This information was later unconfirmed. Manuel did not know how to react to this, and Veronica tried to seduce him and inclined him to intimacy. According to Manuel, nothing happened between them that night because he felt a strange discomfort and threat coming from Veronica, as if his life was in danger. He asked her for time to think about how to proceed, and then hurriedly left her house. On the evening of August 5th, Manuel heard someone ring the doorbell at his house. He opened the door and saw Veronica on the doorstep. She was frighteningly calm, and there was no emotion on her face at all. Veronica asked to be let into the house, but before Manuel could do so, he saw a gun in her hands, and he was scared shitless. He said he would call the police if she did not leave immediately, but Veronica, with the same stony face, replied that he could do so since she no longer cared. She then added that she had killed her daughters, so the police were already looking for her anyway. After these words, Manuel got really scared. He closed the door and hurried to the phone. While Veronica went back to the rental car, she came in and just waited to be arrested. The arrest and the full picture of the crime. When the police arrived at Manuel's house, Veronica was sitting in the car in the driver's seat, and next to her, in the passenger seat, lay the loaded gun she had used hours earlier to shoot her daughters. The young woman did not resist. There was still no emotion on her face. In addition to the gun, 2 more full magazines were found in the car. Already at the station, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun 10 days ago at an exhibition in order to kill her daughters and then take her own life. According to her, she decided to take this desperate step to take revenge on her ex-husband and prevent him from taking their common daughter, Brooklyn. She also added that her personal life didn't work out and she became depressed. Apparently, the eldest daughter noticed the strange behavior of her mother and suspected something wrong because a few days before the tragedy, she directly asked her if she was going to kill them. But what the mother answered her remains a mystery. In the afternoon, on August 5th, Veronica gave her daughters sweets, in which she had previously mixed sleeping pills so that the girls would not resist. When they went to their room and fell asleep, the mother took out a prepared gun, loaded it, and went to her daughters. First, she went to Brooklyn's crib, put the gun to her head, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot woke up Sharon, who didn't immediately realize what was happening, and asked her mother about it. Veronica replied that she would take her and her sister to God, then pointed the gun at her eldest daughter. But Sharon jumped out of bed, rushing to the door, and was immediately shot in the back. She managed to run to the next room and call for help while her mother tried to open the door. When Veronica did enter the room, Sharon screamed and took a second bullet to the chest. Veronica then called her ex-husband and told him what she had done and was now going to take her own life as well. She blamed Ronald for everything, saying that she hated him and that he had ruined her life. However, the young woman then changed her mind about leaving her life for some reason and went to her boyfriend's house, where she was arrested. Young Blood fully admitted her guilt, and when she was asked what punishment she would give herself, the woman said that it should be the death penalty. It is noteworthy that in the state of Virginia, such a measure has not been practiced for a long time, and Veronica knew about it. Trial and sentencing. Initially, the defendant refused the services of a lawyer and fully admitted her guilt. But then, she abruptly changed her testimony and decided to use the help of a public defender. She later claimed that she heard voices ordering her to do this to her daughters, and she complied. Veronica also said that she had a harsh childhood from which she remembered only beatings and hunger, and that her ex-husband had finally killed her belief that there was anything good waiting for her in life. She added that she did not want the same fate to befall her daughters. The trial took a long time because Veronica refused to leave her cell to attend the sessions. In addition, she attempted to commit suicide several times, but did so in such a way that she was saved each time and did not cause any serious harm to herself. The defense lawyer tried to convince the court that his client suffers from a mental disorder developed against the background of childhood traumas, the influence of a religious cult, and the abuse of her ex-husband. The defense lawyer also argued that Veronica was in an insane state at the time of the crime and did not realize her actions. But despite all the efforts of the lawyer, the court saw in the actions of the woman cold calculation because she had purchased weapons in advance, fed the children sweets with sleeping pills, and then proceeded to implement her terrible plan. Her actions were not spontaneous. They could not be written off as a state of affect or a sharp aggravation of mental disorder. The final verdict in the case was handed down in March 2023. Veronica was found guilty and sentenced to 78 years in prison. In fact, this term will be a life sentence for her. It is worth noting that many people found Ronald's behavior in court strange. He did not look like a grief-stricken father, and when his former wife, sobbing, testified, he smirked. After the verdict, he only remarked that he was quite happy with the outcome. He called her name menacingly, and she stopped to examine the unfamiliar silhouette in the darkness. The stranger quickly approached her and grabbed her. She squealed loudly, but a sharp pain knocked her off her feet and the girl fell. The disappearance of people is not an uncommon phenomenon. We live in a disturbing world in which all sorts of things happen to people. Sometimes they disappear through their own fault or through the fault of an intruder. There are many mysterious and unsolved cases of missing citizens all over the world. Analyzing missing persons reports and reviewing police reports shows that the number of disappearance cases has multiplied in 2 decades. Today, let's talk about a case that is still considered one of the worst injustices in the history of the Spanish judicial system, because decades later, Spain cannot forget the story that took place on the Costa del Sol. This story has everything: love, disappearance, blood, and cruel injustice, which will definitely be corrected, but at a very high cost, which for many years will be remembered not only by Spaniards, but also by the whole world. Hilaria Alicia Hornos was born December 2, 1952 in the rural province of Jaén in the municipality of Arroyo de los Llancos, Spain. At the age of 24, Alicia fell in love and married a Dutch citizen, Willem Waninkoff. Soon the family had their firstborn son Guillermo, then a daughter Rosa, then another daughter Rocio. With the appearance of children, the relationship between the spouses became quite tense. Willem became addicted to drinking and because of the long absences and lost his job. At the peak of loud arguments, Willem raised his voice at Alicia and could even hit. In order to provide for her family, Alicia had to take a job as a maid in a hotel in Ibiza. It was during this difficult period of her life that Alicia met Dolores Vasquez, who was the director of the hotel where she worked. Maria Dolores Vasquez was the daughter of immigrants from Galicia, Spain, who had settled in the UK. She had a good education and was well-mannered and an interesting conversationalist. A strong friendship developed between the two women, which later developed into a love relationship. A year after the beginning of the relationship with Dolores, Alicia dared to leave her husband and officially formalize the divorce. Willem returned to the Netherlands, and Alicia moved in with Dolores. Soon the women in love bought a new house in Malaga. After the divorce, Alicia received full custody of the 3 children and raised them with Dolores. After her parents divorced in 1983, Rocio and her sister Rosa looked up to Dolores as a second mother and proudly signed Vasquez Hornos. All 3 of Alicia's children adored Dolores. The 5 of them lived in complete love and understanding as a true family. In 1988, the women decided to break off their love relationship, but continued to live together as good friends until 1994. After 11 years together, they finally broke up and Alicia started dating another man, Juan Charillo. Alicia moved into a new home and fully immersed herself in a new romantic relationship. Life for her was filled with new colors and love. Because the children grew up, the beloved man was always near. But at one point, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. On the morning of October 10th, 1999, Alicia did not find her daughter Rocio at home. At first, Alicia wasn't worried, believing her daughter might have spent the night at her boyfriend's or one of her friends' houses. But when she didn't return home later, Alicia became concerned. The family contacted Rocio's friends and boyfriend, hoping to get reassuring information about their daughter's whereabouts, but no one had seen her. On September 9th, Rocio left home around 5:30 p.m. after saying goodbye to her mother and older sister, Rosa. On that day, she was going with her boyfriend Antonio and her friends to go to a fair in Fuengirola. The girl's house was in the neighborhood of La Cortiera, very close to Antonio's house. Rocio stayed at his house until 10:30 in the evening and decided to return home for a short while to shower and change clothes before meeting her boyfriend and friends at the fair. She never made it home. Even though Alicia was already worried, she decided to take a walk with Juan to calm down rather than immediately report her daughter's disappearance to the police. As they were walking down the street, the woman saw a large blood stain on the road, as if some animal had been killed. She told Juan about it. At first, they didn't pay much attention to it, but when they got closer, Alicia saw sneakers with drops of blood. They were her daughter's sneakers. From Alicia Hornos's recollection, I got closer and saw my daughter's sneakers. I said, "Those are Rocio's sneakers," and he said, "No way." I said, "No, those are my daughter's sneakers." I was hysterical. I said, "Call the police, those are her sneakers." During that walk, in addition to the sneakers, a napkin and several blood stains were found in a vacant lot next to the road Rocio usually walked on. Alicia called the police. Immediately, a missing girl report was filed with a full description. Long hair, brown eyes, wearing a white Nike t-shirt and purple pants. After the officially announced search activities, the forensic investigator reported the need to conduct a forensic examination at the alleged crime scene to find out whose blood was on the road and sneakers. After examining the scene, the first assumptions were the version of an assault or a fight in which someone was injured. But the further investigators followed the trail, the more they found blood stains, and even long chains of stains that looked like drag marks. That means someone was moving very fast, maybe even running. Then the blood traces disappeared, and then the search team noticed a very large stain indicating significant blood loss. They found more and more bloody footprints, similar to the drag marks of a bloody body. These tracks led to car tire prints, after which the blood traces disappeared. A cigarette butt, the brand of which was not common in Spain, was found next to the tread marks. Forensics collected all the samples that could help in any way during the investigation, and DNA from the samples was supposed to help find whoever was at the scene. Based on this data, a thorough investigation was conducted. Along with the investigation and the identification of the blood taken from the traces found, the search for the girl continued. But the investigators were almost certain that Rocio Waninkoff had been murdered. After all, the blood trail started from the sidewalk and continued to a pool of blood large enough to cause her death from volumetric blood loss. Next to the pool were drag marks, and intersecting them and the blood were tire tracks left by a small car with a tire model that was discontinued in 1993. Because the drag marks continued across a heavily sloped area that would have made it difficult for one person to drag the body alone, it was believed that the body was dragged by at least two people and then left in a less open area of the vacant lot before a vehicle pulled up to transport the body. But the search did not stop. Volunteers scoured the area on foot, on motorcycles, up hills. Everyone wanted to find Rocio, but at the same time, they were afraid to find her dead. It was very hard for everyone. There were flyers with Rocio's picture everywhere. All the news channels reported about her disappearance. The family actively cooperated with journalists because as long as Rocio was being talked about, she would not be forgotten. Journalists from all TV channels were on duty at Rocio Vaninkov's house. Everyone wanted the girl to come home, to find her. Time passed, but the search did not yield any results. A few days after Rocio's disappearance, a local cab driver showed up at the police station and said that on the night of the incident, around 10 p.m., he dodged an SUV that was speeding in the oncoming lane of traffic in the area where the girl's sneakers were found on the curb. He added that he heard a piercing scream as he passed the vehicle. There was no doubt, Rocio had been kidnapped and killed by an unknown assailant. This was confirmed by DNA analysis. The blood on the road belonged to Rocio Vaninkov. The family was at a loss for words. These feelings were spreading fast. They were felt not only by the girl's family and friends, but by the whole of Spain. On November 2nd, 1999, 25 days after Rocio's disappearance, a disfigured body, possibly Rocio's, was found near the Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club, between Marbella and San Pedro de Alcantara. The body was partially covered with bushes and fallen leaves, and was hidden behind a hedge separating a housing development that was quite close to the highway. It was a narrow path that could hardly be traveled by car. The girl was searched for within the confines of her home, and she was found in another town. When the police arrived at the place, they found the body very badly decomposed. During the evidence collection, large black garbage bags were found containing the girl's clothes. One of the bags had the number 8 painted on it, indicating that the bags had not been purchased specifically for the transportation of the body, but had only been reused. Upon discovering the clothes, investigators concluded that the clothes could have belonged to the missing Rocio Vaninkov. The missing person's sister, Rosa, recognized several rings, 2 t-shirts, and other items found in 2 garbage bags near the body as belonging to Rocio. The t-shirts were torn from stab wounds, and clothing below the waist was never found. The remains of the body were taken to the lab for forensic analysis. 6 forensic experts worked slowly and meticulously all night, using all their knowledge and skills. They had a difficult job ahead of them, because the body was badly decomposed. Decomposition is much faster in rain and heat when there is a certain amount of humidity. Not a single organ was preserved, only the bones were intact. The goal was to find something else that could help the investigation and tell us how the attack took place. As a result, numerous close wounds were found, and there were 8 stab wounds on his back caused by a weapon with a single-sided blade. According to experts, the attack was very fast and brutal. Most likely the victim was immobilized or did not have time to react. Fingerprints were found on plastic bags that were found where the body was found. Police already had fingerprints and tire prints from the car. They also found 2 tissue samples on Rocio Vaninkov's body. At that point, there was still too little evidence that would lead to the arrest of a specific suspect. But the investigation had some evidence, data, and leads that the civil guard was looking into. The public pressure had an undue influence, and the investigators were just bound to find something, but they did not. Because Rocio's body was badly decomposed, it was impossible to establish basic details, such as whether the girl had been sexually assaulted. Investigators came to one conclusion when they saw a corpse with its legs spread apart. Since the victim's legs were spread too wide, they thought it was staged. That is, the perpetrator made it look like violence. So they ruled out the motive of sexual assault and subsequent murder, and focused on a crime motivated by revenge and hatred. It was a very emotional attack, which meant that the girl could have been attacked by someone very close to her, who may have been very upset with her. With the evidence and facts gathered, the investigators conducted follow-up interviews. First of all, the investigators questioned her boyfriend, Antonio Hirata. He was the last person to see Rocio alive, and he was the one she was supposed to meet again that night. But the guy had an alibi, because he just fell asleep at home and did not go to the fair that day. All of Rocio's relatives and friends were questioned, but they all had solid alibis. A year after Rocio Vaninkov's death, the civil guard was able to narrow down the number of suspects, and by the end of the year they found a suspect who, in the opinion of the investigation, all the signs pointed to, that person turned out to be Dolores Vasquez, There was absolutely no evidence against Dolores, but thanks to the media, everyone began to believe this woman was guilty. Dolores Vasquez was a close friend of Alicia's. As it often happens, journalists distorted and even invented information. Allegedly, Alicia from the very first day accused Dolores in the death of her daughter. But at the time of the crime, their relationship had already ended 4 years ago. The investigation actively went after the public. The investigation focused entirely on Dolores, and now there was a motive in the case. A young girl could be a hindrance, or otherwise interfere with the romantic relationship between the two women. Everyone said that if it hadn't been for Rocio, maybe Alicia would have gone back to Dolores. It was Dolores' way of getting back at Alicia for not wanting to go back to her. That's what people said. In the eyes of the press and the public, Dolores Vasquez was guilty from the moment she was arrested. Even though the woman did not confess to anything, residents were convinced of her guilt mainly because the police believed that someone close to her was the killer. Family members claimed that Dolores was an aggressive and violent woman who was also very jealous. Alicia told reporters that Dolores was a vindictive and cruel person. The public condemned Dolores. The fact that Dolores Vasquez was non-traditional was a reason to attack her during the trial. This was not the norm in Spain. A sarcastic, aggressive, calculating, cold-blooded woman. The character was beginning to take shape. A vicious, heartless woman. A woman who bided her time for 4 years, finally coming up with a crime plan out of hatred. The audience cheered, having independently created the image of a calculating villainess for Dolores. The trial turned into an entertainment. People watched the trial only because they had nothing better to do. A huge number of people gathered outside the courthouse. People wanted to get into the courthouse to follow the trial and not miss a second. Journalists were all over the news that a close family friend had been charged with the murder of Rocio Wanenkoff. Dolores Vasquez was the kind of woman no one liked. Therefore, she had virtually no chance at trial. She wasn't friendly or nice. But how many people are there in the world who are not sociable and friendly with everyone? We don't call them all criminals because they don't smile at us when we meet them, do we? In this case, the battle was fought not only in the courthouse, but also on the streets where the public was involved. All of the information, especially the rumors that the media blew up, could not help but influence the opinion of the jury. After all the TV stations, almost all the TV shows were saying that Dolores Vasquez was the one responsible for Rocio's death, as well as all the information that the reporters were distorting. So a lie told 1,000 times became the truth for Dolores. In fact, there was absolutely no evidence against Dolores Vasquez, but apparently justice just decided that someone should be in jail for it, and chose a victim who had a dubious alibi, as well as a bunch of flaws that automatically made her a scapegoat. Dolores wasn't seen at the scene. The tire tracks didn't match the car she drove. The fabric fibers found didn't match Vasquez's clothes. Nor did the fingerprints found on the trash bags at the scene. And she also had an alibi. She claimed that she was babysitting her sick mother that day while watching her little niece. But this was disregarded. More than 50 people were called to court to testify. Only once did Dolores take the stand. "I didn't kill Rocio. I didn't even see her that day. All I'm asking you, I'm asking all of Spain, is to find who did it, because it wasn't me. And whoever did it is still out there. Maybe even among you in the courtroom. There has never been any evidence against me, and there never will be, because I am innocent." Spain has a very poor judicial system that often oversteps the law. Spanish prosecutors and investigating judges are ready to step over the law and human fate to prove their theories. Absolute disregard for the law. There was no physical evidence. So the Civil Guard report described only the circumstantial evidence that pointed to Dolores Vasquez and profiled her psychologically. The jury majority found defendant Dolores Vasquez guilty of murder. She was sentenced to a 16-year prison term. The public rejoiced. Rocio's funeral was very well attended. Journalists were constantly filming despite other people's grief. At that moment, all of Rocio's relatives and all the people in the town lived in fear. This fear fueled the many television programs that covered the details of the case. After Dolores' arrest, the victim's family went from one television program to another, pulling out old stories that confirmed Vasquez's cold, unfriendly, demanding, and cruel character. It took years and another similar crime to make it clear that Rocio Vanenkov was not at all as the public and the press had fantasized. On the morning of August 15, 2003, the parents of 17-year-old Sonia Carabantes reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. They had already called her friends, but they said that they had walked her friend to the door of her house. But Sonia wasn't home. In the street, 3 doors down from her house, right next to a tree, her parents found her shoes, purse, and phone. There were traces of blood on the cars parked nearby. Sound familiar? But if the suspect has been in jail for almost a year and a half, did the police make a mistake and have an innocently convicted person in jail? Authorities immediately began searching for and investigating the coin incident. Time passed, and despair increasingly gripped the family. There were searches in the neighborhood, but the bloodstains on Sonia's clothes left no hope for a favorable outcome. One of the main pieces of evidence in Sonia's case was a car headlight. The officers of the Civil Guard made inquiries to all the car repair shops in search of a car with a broken headlight that matched the description. There were a variety of different theories of the attack. Among them were chains of rape and other similar crimes to the disappearance of the girl in Motril. But the important fact remained that Rocio and Sonia had disappeared during the fair. All employees of the fair who worked in Motril and Coin were checked. Just as in the case of Rocio, flyers with Sonia's image were posted everywhere. So many people were involved in the search for her. They were very active in helping the police, not only by donating their time, but also by providing any assistance needed for the search. In addition to these searches, the Civil Guard also continued their investigation. The main objective was to find the girl alive, but on the 5th day after her disappearance, with the help of search dogs, Sonia's body was found near Coin. It was found in a creek under a pile of rocks. It had rained heavily the night before, washing away any trace that might have helped the police in locating the culprit. On the day of her disappearance, Sonia was at a fair in Coin. She said goodbye to friends near her home. It was there that she was attacked. The perpetrator hit her several times, which made Sonia partially unconscious, and she was unable to fight back because the attack was sudden and violent. The perpetrator then took her away in a car to a remote location away from her home. Both internal and external injuries were inflicted, and then the girl was strangled, which was the cause of death. Due to the fact that Sonia was found very quickly, it was possible to collect all the evidence and analyze the results of the forensic examination. Colonel Pacagabella reported that important evidence was indeed found on the body of Sonia Carabantes. The biological material was analyzed and then entered into the police criminal DNA database, where the much-anticipated matches were obtained with the genetic material found on the cigarette butt that was found at the crime scene in the Rocio Vanenkov case. When the 2 DNA samples were compared, they were found to be identical to each other. The man who killed Rocio in 1999 and the man who attacked Sonia turned out to be the same person. The news was incredible. Dolores Vasquez, who had been condemned without exaggeration by the whole of Spain, turned out to be innocent, while the real culprit walked free and took the life of another young girl. The puzzle is complete. An English brand cigarette butt and skin particles under the victim's fingernails. The DNA from both pieces of evidence belonged to the same person. After that, events began to unfold very quickly. On September 18th, a young woman, Cecilia Pantoja, contacted the police and said she suspected her ex-husband when she saw bloodstains on his t-shirt, just days after Sonia's body was found. She said her husband was also absent from home twice, traveling somewhere in a car on the day of the Rocio attack. Through DNA testing and the woman's testimony, police were able to identify the real killer of Rocio and Sonia. The perpetrator's name was Tony King, and he was well known in Britain as the Holloway Strangler. Tony Alexander King's crime wave began when he was still a teenager in the Holloway neighborhood of North London. In 1985, the neighborhood was the scene of a series of attacks on women in which the victims were strangled and abused. At the time, King went by his birth name, Anthony Bromwich. 5 weeks later, he was finally caught and convicted at the age of 19 for strangling 5 women to unconsciousness with a rope or cable and then abusing them. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison, calling him a monster for committing the crimes because of his own inadequacy. He served only half of his sentence and was paroled in 1991, but returned to prison a few weeks later for robbing a woman and threatening her with a knife. In search of a new life, he changed his name to Tony King, married Cecilia Pantoja, and tried to live a normal family life. Their marriage produced a daughter, but King soon returned to his old habits. The police in Spain realized that they were on the right track. Tony King was put under 24-hour surveillance, and a month after Sonia's death, he was arrested. Under questioning, Tony King confessed to killing 2 innocent girls. After his arrest, he said he followed Rocio as she entered a busy street on her way home from her boyfriend's house and held a razor to her neck. When she tried to free herself from her attacker, the razor stabbed into Rocio's neck. The monster panicked and stabbed her 9 times. In 2005, King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the kidnapping, violence, and murder of Sonia Carabantes. The court ordered him to pay the victim's family the equivalent of about $350,000. He also received an additional 7 years for attempted violence against a woman in Malaga in 2001. The following year, he was also found guilty of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff and received an additional 19-year sentence. Before his trial, King sent letters to Sonia and Rocio's mothers asking for forgiveness. He is currently serving his sentence at Herrera de la Mancha Maximum Security Prison in Ciudad Real in Spain. After the case was closed, a major scandal erupted in Spain over the fact that an innocent man was convicted of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff. We are accustomed to imagining that miscarriages of justice brought to light bring shame to those involved and monetary costs to the state. But this is not the case in Spain. It is difficult to accept and realize, but in the 21st century, not only police and courts can brutally punish an innocent person, but even society may well trample a man into the mud, and even if he manages to prove his case, absolutely no one will apologize. It took more than a year before it became clear that Dolores Vasquez was telling the truth when she dryly and unemotionally repeated that she was innocent. What all of Spain had taken for cruelty and insensitivity turned out to be simply the personality traits of a woman. In 2008, the Spanish Ministry of Justice offered Dolores Vasquez 120,000 euros in compensation, which was less than the 4 million euros that Dolores had originally demanded. But no one ever apologized to Dolores for the way she was treated. Dolores Vasquez, whose parents moved to Spain from Epsom, returned to the UK after she was released from prison. More than 20 years have passed, but Dolores has still not received an apology for the way she was treated, nor has she received any compensation since the case was closed. In 2014, she was working for a transport company in East London and underwent a psychological evaluation after her ordeal. She recently said she is still waiting for an apology after years of anxiety, when she found it difficult to talk to people and find work for the years of fear and humiliation she lived in. The Dolores Vasquez imprisonment case is considered one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in Spain's judicial history since 1910. Criminals easily get away with it, even if they are stupid enough to leave their DNA behind, simply because they cross the country's border. The police rush to pin the case on at least one person without going into detail. The press hypes up scandals and digs into the dirty laundry of not only the perpetrators, but also the victims. Society easily labels and considers it normal to put someone in jail just because they dislike that person. It is a pity that such truth is true for absolutely all countries of the world. Thanks for watching, guys. Another mysterious story took us to Namyangju City in South Korea. On June 6, 2006, 29-year-old student Lee Yoon-hee disappeared without a trace. It would seem that nothing is unusual. People often disappear. However, this case is still stirring the minds of the public. Many people to this day continue to argue and put forward their own versions of what happened. Disappearance. For the first time about the fact that the girl disappeared spoke on June 7th. The alarm was raised by her friends and classmates. Lee did not come to the university for the last classes, which was very unlike her. She was a responsible and efficient student and had never missed a class before. After studying, Lee's friend Min wanted to check on her and went to her house. However, after ringing the doorbell, no one opened the door. Then she didn't bother and left. Later in an interview, the girl admitted that she decided that Yoon-hee wanted to be alone and had a day off. It so happened that her acquaintance had been haunted by a series of troubles lately. Therefore, it was possible that she needed time to get away. However, on June 8th, she didn't show up again. This time, Min went with Kim, Lee's friend, and 2 other guys to the missing person's house. There was no other way to contact her. It so happened that a week before the described events, the main character's purse was stolen, and together with her purse, Idaho card, and cell phone. When young people knocked on the door, the dog reacted to the noise from inside. The dog barked loudly, but there was no response from the owner. Since Yoon-hee's door had a digital lock, only someone who knew the code could open it. No one present had such information, so Min called the older sister of the wanted woman. But unfortunately, she hadn't heard from her sister and didn't know the code to the door. All this only added to the excitement. Eventually, it was decided to contact the police. Law enforcement officers contacted the owner of the apartment and asked him to come to open the door. Upon entering the student's residence, everyone immediately smelled a foul odor. Life story. Lee Yoon-hee was a pretty and colorful girl. She originally studied fine arts and statistics at a women's university in Seoul. However, after graduation, she realized that she had chosen the wrong path. Since childhood, the protagonist loved animals, and even as an adult has 2 dogs for which she took care of with pleasure. Along with the craving for art, she liked to watch documentaries about nature, visit zoos, farms, and animal shelters. Therefore, having received a diploma, she was not afraid to start from the beginning and finally decided. At the age of 25, the girl decided to connect life with veterinary medicine. Parents did not immediately support their daughter. The traditional family believed that at such an age, it was time for her to get married and have children. However, Lee was a modern girl, so she wanted to build a career for a start. Therefore, in 2003, she entered the higher school of veterinary medicine. The new specialty liked the student and was given easily. At the same time, in order to be independent, she began to work part-time. Lately, the girl has been tutoring younger students, as well as children of teachers. In 2006, when the study was coming to an end, Lee was preparing for final exams. It is understandable that trying to combine study and work, she was very tired. But circumstances demanded it. A robbery. On June 2nd, Lee was returning home after a private class. She was walking at a slow pace, absorbed in her thoughts. Suddenly, 2 men on a motorcycle sped past her at breakneck speed. As she recovered from her fright, the student realized that the intruders had stolen her purse. Several witnesses to the incident tried to help and went after them. Their van managed to chase the motorcycle for a while. However, once the thieves turned down a narrow alley, the chase had to be called off. The culprits were not punished, and Yoon-hee was left without her important belongings. After that, she warned everyone she knew that she would be out of touch for a while. The girl was so upset that she told her friend, "I can't believe the world can be such a horrible place." However, at that moment, she didn't know even half of what she was going to experience. The situation at Lee's apartment. Lee's apartment was empty. What was noticeable was the mess made by the dogs. 2 puppies were lying on the floor. In the absence of water and food, they were dehydrated. Apparently, the animals were trying to find something to eat. Therefore, scraps of papers and clothes were lying everywhere. It became clear that the pets had not been walked for several days, hence the pungent odor that filled the room. Min noticed her friend's conspicuous backpack standing quietly in the corner of the room. Since it contained the essentials, Yoon-hee never went anywhere without it. This indicated that she left the apartment in a hurry or for a short time. The condition of the house did not seem suspicious to the police. At first glance, nothing was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. Therefore, assuming that the wanted girl had left voluntarily and would return soon, the police left. However, such arguments did not satisfy her friends. First, Lee would never in the world would not have left the animals to starve. Secondly, She could not disappear without telling anyone, so the company contacted Lee's family members. The family confirmed that they hadn't heard from her in days. Dissatisfied with the police officer's conclusion, Min and her friend went to the station. Unfortunately, due to the slowness and poor handling of the investigation, Korean law enforcement agencies have been repeatedly admonished for their actions. So the young people decided to insist on their own and officially report their friend missing. Evidence. At this time, 2 of Lee's other friends stayed at the house. They wanted to wait for her parents and discuss everything. Not wanting to embarrass the missing person's relatives, the guys decided to clean up the apartment. They washed the floors, threw out the trash, and even washed dirty laundry. In general, destroyed all the evidence that had taken place. In addition, it was later learned that upon arrival, Lee's sister threw away the cigarette butt found on the veranda. She did so because she didn't want to embarrass her sister in front of her parents. They would be very upset to know that their daughter smokes. But the thing is, Yoon-hee's acquaintances unanimously claimed that they had never seen it. Perhaps in this way, another solid piece of evidence in the case was destroyed. Afterward, the guys were very sorry that wanting to do better only aggravated the situation. The young people explained that at that time the police had not taken up the investigation and had not warned them not to touch anything. When Lee's parents arrived in the evening, they inspected the apartment. Dong, the girl's father, reported that several other things were missing along with his daughter. The first thing he named was a hammer. The man explained that he personally insisted that such a necessary item was in the house. Lee Yoon-hee had always laughed about it and kept it in plain sight. The other missing item was an antique coffee table. The student was particularly fond of it, often eating at it and using it as a bedside table. It was unclear to everyone where the girl could have gone, as well as where 2 unrelated objects had disappeared to. The unknown painted a frightening picture. The last party. That day, in addition to the police report from Lee's friends, there was another one. The concerned parents of the missing girl decided not to delay. It was already obvious that enough time had passed since the alleged disappearance. She was last seen on June 5th. That was when Yoon-hee and her classmates finished their last practice of the semester. The young people were going to celebrate the significant event. For this purpose, they even invited the teachers. Obviously, not everyone agreed, but some still decided to keep company with a group of 40 students. The protagonist was upset that she had suffered another failure because of an unsuccessful, in her opinion, operation on an animal. Due to this, she had no desire to go to the party. Some even claimed that she locked herself in the restroom and cried. Perhaps before graduation, the diligent student simply lost her nerve. Therefore, she was so critical of herself and saw the world in pessimistic colors. Nevertheless, her friends managed to calm the girl down and persuade her to join the party at the karaoke bar. By 10 o'clock in the evening, Lee's mood had noticeably improved. Everyone gathered in the pub. They ate, drank, remembered university everyday life, danced and sang songs. They were supported by the heroine of the story. CCTV cameras recorded how at around 2:30 at night she left the toilet and left the celebration. It was noticeable that the girl was upset about something. However, the rapid departure was noticed by a 27-year-old guy named Kim and went after her. According to the man, he asked what happened. Since young people were close since their school years, Lee confessed and complained to her friend that someone was watching her in the toilet. However, she did not give any details. Kim was concerned for his friend. He knew that she was already frightened by the recent attack on the street, so he offered to carry her backpack and escort her home. Lee lived in a rented apartment about a 20-minute walk away. Kim later told investigators that he was unable to walk his buddy to the door. She said goodbye to him in one of the dark alleys. However, the young man still decided to wait until the lights came on in the windows of her house. After making sure that the girl was not threatened, he turned around and went to his house. It should be noted that the guy lived nearby. On June 6th, the country celebrated a national holiday, Memorial Day. Therefore, the absence of news from her did not seem strange to anyone. However, it was after the party that no one saw Yoon-hee. The beginning of the investigation. During the investigation, curious facts were established. On the morning of June 5th, about 4 o'clock the day before the disappearance, one of the classmates came to see Lee. He said that he was fixing a loose leg of the coffee table. He told the investigation that Lee did not want to throw it away, so she asked him to fix it. He stayed in the apartment for about half an hour, he said. After the short repair, the couple went to the university. He was not present during the celebration and never met Lee again. Some claim that the young people were in a romantic relationship, but there is no concrete evidence of this. In parallel, the relatives of the missing woman conducted their own search. One day, Lee's father, Dong, in search of any clues, explored the neighborhood where his daughter lived. Suddenly, between two garbage cans, the man noticed a familiar table. However, the tabletop and the unscrewed metal legs were lying separately. The relatives assumed that it was damaged during the events that took place in the apartment. The find was submitted for examination. It is quite possible that on the ill-fated night, Lee was the victim of a brutal attack. Her father was worried that she could have been killed because of the hammer he had given her. It is possible that the perpetrator, having gotten rid of the table, took the tool with him or hid it somewhere. Stalker theory. Amazingly, during the inspection of Lee Yoon-hee's home, the experts were unable to find any fingerprints, DNA, blood, or any other evidence. So thoroughly had Lee's friends cleaned the apartment. Therefore, the police decided to resort to searching for eyewitnesses. Since the walls of the apartment building were quite thin, someone could surely hear something. However, none of the girls' neighbors reported anything unusual. Many of the residents refused to engage in any conversation at all. At the same time, one elderly woman said that a few days before Lee's disappearance, she herself had been harassed. Someone, presumably a man, followed her to her front door and then stopped. The woman decided that opening the door would give a chance for an attack, so she turned sharply and came face to face with the stalker. She noted that the hood made it difficult to see his face. However, her actions frightened the unknown man. He turned around and left. It should be noted that in South Korea, pushing has become widespread. This term means unwanted, intrusive attention to one person by another or a group of people. Very often, law enforcement officers record reports of women who report repeated incidents. It is not uncommon for a stalker to stand at the door and wait before leaving. This further creates feelings of anxiety and fear. Often, sexual offenses are triggered by stalking. Therefore, on October 20th, 2022, a law came into effect that made stalking a crime. The sanction of the article provides for imprisonment for up to 3 years. Previously, it was qualified as a misdemeanor and punishable by a fine of $70. Some believe that a similar situation could have happened to our heroine. However, her case could end tragically. Later, this version found confirmation. In the house across the street, there is an apartment from which there is a clear view of Lee's windows. Whoever lived there could unobstructedly observe her actions. During the investigation, it turned out that the premises had been empty for a long time. However, an inspection revealed several empty cigarette packs and used tissues. Unfortunately, the DNA extracted was not suitable for examination. Nevertheless, it indicated that someone had visited the apartment periodically and stood at the window. The investigation is ongoing. Detectives interviewed all the party participants. Unfortunately, none of them knew what had happened to the girl during the celebration, much less after it, except perhaps Kim, who escorted her friend to the alley and waited until she went home. The sincerity of 21 people was tested on a lie detector. All of the subjects passed, but it is still worth noting that this method is not always reliable. However, the polygraph has been used in the country since 1950 and is trustworthy. In addition, task forces with search dogs searched the entire city, as well as the nearest mountains. Volunteers put up tens of thousands of flyers asking for any information. Later, Lee's parents sold all their property and offered 10 million won for information about their daughter's whereabouts. However, all was in vain. A new lead. The missing girl's family and acquaintances wanted to believe that she would return alive. Perhaps because of the stress of her experience, Yoon-hee decided to disappear for a while, forgetting her responsibilities to her parents and the pets she left at home. Maybe she's the one who threw away her favorite but broken table and her unwanted hammer. And there would be an innocent explanation for the dried napkins in the apartment across the street. But that last hope vanished as soon as the cybercrime experts got involved. They scrutinized Lee's computer and recovered the deleted files. Some gruesome details emerged. On June 6th at 2:59 a.m., about the same time the girl was supposed to return home, someone gained access to her desktop. He opened Naver, an internet portal used by 70% of the country's residents. He then typed the following phrases into the search: sexual harassment, contact the police, and 112. The work session ended at 3:02 a.m. The computer itself was manually shut down at 4:21 a.m. Specialists assumed that the missing student came home and sat down at the computer. Based on searches, she was sexually harassed at a party or on her way home. And since she didn't have a phone, she looked for a way to report it online. However, after 3 minutes, her actions were interrupted by someone. Experts also found out that on June 8th, between 3:15 in the afternoon and 5:21 in the afternoon, someone turned on the girl's computer again. At the same time, the unknown person deleted the history of messages in the messenger from 10:48 p.m. on June 4th until 3:04 a.m. on June 8th. To do this, he used a special program known in narrow circles. After it is not possible to restore the chat history. At the same time, it shows that a person who is well-versed in computers acted. 2 days later, someone again logged into Lee's account on a popular music site and even checked his email. Using the IP address, police were able to trace the location of the connection. It was a motel in the town of Kunsan, which is 119 miles away. After reviewing the CCTV cameras from that day, detectives found no signs of suspicious behavior or traces of the missing student. However, this fact indicated that she did not disappear of her own accord. Someone was skillfully cleaning up the traces of the crime that had been committed. The first person who comes to mind is Kim, who by a strange coincidence was at Lee's house at the time of the mass deletion of correspondence. If you remember, he stayed with a friend to wait for Yoon-hee's family to arrive and did some cleaning. This gave him the perfect opportunity and enough time to cover up the unwanted actions. Amazingly, when investigators asked the boys if they had turned on Lee's computer, both said they didn't remember. In fact, there were no witnesses, no traces, and no significant leads in the case of Lee Yoon-hee's disappearance. Possible evidence was destroyed during the cleaning and clearing of the chat history. Had the girl's body been found, it is almost certain that the perpetrator would have been caught. For the most part, the victim keeps key evidence of the crime. To this day, however, the student's whereabouts remain unknown, as does her condition. She is most likely dead, and her remains are safely hidden or managed to get rid of them forever. These circumstances lead to another version of what happened: a mad professor. It is known that the faculty where Lee studied collected animal carcasses. This was done so that students were engaged in autopsy and study. At the end of the study, the remains were collected and sent by the agency to a special incinerator. Before this, the biomass was packed in specialized bags. According to the company's rules, the collectors were not allowed to look into them. It should be noted that the sight is unpleasant, so they would not do it themselves. Approximately 88 pounds of animal remains are placed in the incinerator daily. However, investigators learned that 2 days after Yoon-hee's disappearance, about 242 pounds were incinerated. In other words, much more than usual. The educational institution worked on different animals: dogs, cats, pigs, and cows. However, according to the records of June 8th, there were no large animals. The dilemma arises: what else was burned that day? Could the extra weight have belonged to the missing student's body as well as other evidence? Unfortunately, this question remains unanswered. It was not possible to conduct a genetic examination, as all the ashes were destroyed. Assuming that Lee's body was indeed burned, it means that it was done by someone who killed her and had access to the room. For example, one of the faculty members, Professor Moon, was of great interest, the same man whose children Lee was studying with when her purse was stolen. During the interrogations, several people reported that Moon sometimes showed attention to a beautiful student. He openly flirted with her, unashamed of his status and age. The man was also present during the celebrations at that party and tried to sit next to Lee, but she moved away from him, calling him a creep. It was obvious that she was not accepting his advances. Initially, Moon said he left the event early and was home around 2 a.m. Then, when other detectives noticed that he had left after Lee, he changed his statement. It is quite possible that the professor molested her and then stalked her. Afraid of ruining his reputation, he may have silenced Yoon-hee. It's possible that he followed her that night, then broke into her apartment and killed her. Then he moved the body to the crematorium. He could also have taken the student to the campus by force and burned her alive. Either way, there's a lot of speculation. On the one hand, a stranger obsessed with Lee. He could have stolen her purse to get his hands on the object of his adoration and watched from the apartment across the street before or after the event. It is possible that it was he who attacked, kidnapped, or killed the poor girl. On the other hand, there are a lot of questions about her buddy Kim. Dong stated that there was a suspect they were sure of and pointed him out. There's no video footage of the young men walking home together after the party. Also, no one present saw Lee and Kim leave. It's hard to believe that the girl didn't want to be escorted all the way to the door and said goodbye in an alley at night. Everyone knows that the guy has been in love with her since high school. There is an opinion that he even went to university because of her. At the same time, Lee sincerely trusted him and loved him in her own way, accepted his gifts, spent time with him. However, Lee's feelings were not what he would have wanted. Many joked that Kim became her third puppy. Later, one important detail came to light. It turns out that the young man knew the code from the door of the beloved. In her absence, he repeatedly came to the apartment, looked after the dogs. However, he did not tell about it, so as not to defame the girl in the eyes of others. By our standards, South Korea is still a rather strict country. At the same time, it looks suspicious. His motive could have been simple jealousy. He could have snapped when he found out Lee had a boyfriend. He may have secretly followed her and then went up to her apartment. There was an argument during which Kim broke the coffee table and took his girlfriend's life. He then decided to stay behind to clean up the crime scene. At the same time, no charges were brought against him. Moreover, in an interview, the lead detective hinted that he didn't think the guy was involved in the crime, and despite popular belief, the most likely suspect is Professor Moon. The man could have used his official position to lure a student he liked into the lab and do something terrible to her. As of 2017, Kim was married, had children, and his own business. Lee's father still accused him of being involved in his daughter's disappearance. He even organized several demonstrations outside the man's private clinic. To defend his honor, Jim was forced to file a defamation lawsuit. With the court's decision, Dong was banned from approaching Kim's building. To this day, the man claims that many media outlets have defamed his name. 18 years have passed, but the search for Lee still continues. In time, her photos and age image were made public. The missing person's parents have grown old. But before leaving this world, they want to calm down and know for sure whether their daughter is alive or not. Over time, any pain is dulled, even from the loss of a loved one. But there's nothing worse than being left in the dark for years. What do you guys think? Is Lee Yoon-hee alive? And if not, who really killed her? Today, we will visit Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas chic. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2, 2015, at 07:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashem Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jamieson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas where she began working at Smile Zona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. 1 bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 07:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same garage. A few minutes later, a man approaches her, shoots her, and runs to the side, after which he jumps in and black Jeep on the move. The videos were of poor quality and the crime scene itself was not visible on them. It was impossible to identify the assailants, but the vehicle was put on a wanted list. It was decided to place the camera footage, images of the Jeep and the driver in the media. The authorities appealed to the public for help. and it helped. Police were contacted by a man named Jose Luis Ortiz. He reported that the car in the footage belonged to him. But Jose wasn't involved in the shooting and he wasn't driving it. When questioned, Jose explained that on the morning of September 2nd, he was approached by two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez. They asked Jose to repair their car and, in return, to lend them his Jeep until the evening. The man agreed. He also said that later that evening, Brenda called Jose to a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Crystal Cortez, later that evening, drove the Jeep to Jose's house, so the man was quite surprised when his Jeep made the news. When Jose saw his Jeep on the TV program, he asked Brenda about it. She first said that it was a different Jeep on the screen. Then Brenda explained that Crystal had been traveling somewhere on her business and she didn't know about it. Brenda Delgado suggested that Jose not tell anyone anything and to simply repaint the Jeep. She was willing to pay to paint the Jeep. Jose was awaiting a decision on his U.S. citizenship and did not want any trouble with the police. He realized that Brenda had set him up. So Jose went to the police again and testified again. So the police tracked all the movements of the Jeep that day and found the two young women whose names Jose had given them. Brenda Delgado was the first person investigators called in for questioning. The woman told police that she never knew Kendra Hatcher and had never seen her before. When asked where she was on September 2nd at 07:42 p.m., Brenda stated her alibi because she was at Chili's restaurant with Jose. Brenda even provided receipts for the dinner. But how often, and more importantly, what do you keep dinner receipts for? So gradually, assembled in minute detail, the truth that the participants in the crime tried to hide was revealed. The central figure in the investigation was Brenda Delgado. She was born into a fairly simple family, Luis and Maria Delgado, who immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father was a factory worker. They found a home in a low-income neighborhood in southeast Dallas. It was then that Luis found a job in construction, and his wife worked at the U.S. Post Office cleaning houses. Brenda was their second child and their only girl. Not only was she an excellent student who was loved by her teachers, but she also worked part-time at a flower store and as a waitress. Brenda was very ambitious and dreamed of going to medical school someday. But the sad reality was that her parents couldn't afford the expensive tuition. So after graduating from Skyline High School in 2000, she continued to live with her parents, only dreaming of an affluent and beautiful life. On the way to her goal, Brenda worked hard. She was a dental assistant, and alongside that, she worked at a day spa in North Park Center where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, Brenda met Ricardo Paniagua and fell in love with him. Their first date was at a Jennifer Lopez concert and was like her dream date. In November 2012, 3 months after they met, Brenda moved in with Ricardo at his home in Fitzhugh Urban Flats. The man was also charmed by Brenda so much that he even met her parents. In 2013, she uploaded a post in honor of his birthday on Facebook where she wrote words of congratulations. "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together we have shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you." Brenda then found out she was pregnant, but at Ricardo's insistence, she terminated the pregnancy, which left her heartbroken. A little recovered from the decision, Brenda decides to devote herself to her career and her beloved Ricky. In the fall of the same year, she enrolled in Sanford. At first glance, it seemed that Brenda had gotten over the emotional blow of the breakup. However, this was not the case. Brenda's painful dependence on Ricardo only gained momentum. And when Ricky posted a joint photo on social media with his new lover Kendra, who looked like a photo model, Brenda was up to something terrible. Many who knew her testified that Brenda dreamed of getting rid of Kendra. After obtaining information about Brenda and her personal life, investigators were able to surmise that the offended woman had a motive to get rid of her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend. They dated intermittently from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky and Kendra met. Ricardo was confident that he and Brenda remained friends and saw no problems between Brenda and Kendra. After all, he had been on dates with other women before meeting Kendra. And why would it be meeting Kendra that would turn Brenda's mind? However, the picture of the reconstructed events confirmed how insidious and cruel an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado thought she had devised the perfect plan to win back her former lover and rid him of the superfluous figure, Kendra Hatcher. At first, she established communication with Ricardo, pretending to be his best friend, provided all kinds of support, was interested in how he and Kendra are progressing in their relationship. Secretly, she knew everything about their plans for the future, and Ricardo believed that this is a sincere interest. But it's a shame that men know women so poorly and sometimes blindly trust them. After Ricardo learned that Kendra had died, he shared his grief with Brenda via text message, and she supported her friend in every way possible and offered to do anything for him. Ricky had no way of guessing his ex's true motives. As it turned out, Brenda had been playing her own game for months. She had opened Ricardo's mail and knew about all his plans with Kendra, even where and when they had booked tickets. All of this was infuriating to Brenda. She longed to be rid of Kendra Hatcher, truly believing that she had taken her place. Brenda transferred Ricardo's account to her phone and kept tabs on him. Following Ricky and Kendra practically became her raison d'etre. Brenda became completely dependent on the stalking. She quit her job and devoted all her time to realizing her goals. Over time, a cruel and terrifying plan was born in Brenda's mind: to kill the hated Kendra and take her place beside her lover. For its realization, Brenda addressed to many of her acquaintances with an offer for money to harm Kendra Hatcher. Thus, through mutual acquaintances, she found a single-mother 21-year-old Crystal Cortez, who, because of the big financial problems, just for $500 was ready to help her. At Brenda's behest, Crystal found the perpetrator, a man named Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Crystal handed Christopher $500 from Brenda, as well as 2 types of illegal substances. Several 2 women followed Kendra to learn her habits and daily schedule, to further select the location and time of the crime. On September 2, 2015, they took Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher Love waited for Kendra in the parking lot. They did not pursue her on her way home from work because they were afraid of falling behind her in traffic. In the evening, the criminals completed their devious plan and were rewarded for a job well done. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were apprehended. The suspects denied their guilt and their presence at the scene of the crime. However, the situation changed when Love was found to have the gun that killed Kendra in the side compartment of the car. Crystal, on the other hand, was nervous and constantly confused in her testimony, telling different stories about the reasons for the appearance of the SUV in different parts of the city. So, at the first interrogation, Crystal admitted that she was the woman who was driving in the parking lot, but she arrived there at the will of an armed carjacker who got into the SUV and forced her into the parking lot that evening. She, wishing to remain innocent, gave false testimony, saying that her son was in the car with her, but this information was later not confirmed, because no child was recorded on the cameras. As the interrogation continued and more evidence became available, Crystal changed her testimony and wanted to make a deal with the investigation. She agreed to testify and testify against Brenda in exchange for less time. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the crime was her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting with Brenda, they began planning the crime. The police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricardo was over. She was obsessed and desperate to win him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy to be his loyal friend, but her life began to fall apart. She began to resent Kendra, believing that she had taken her place. According to Crystal, it was at this point that Brenda decided that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. The perfect crime plan emerged in Brenda Delgado's mind. In testimony, Crystal detailed how Brenda devised the perfect crime. Enlisting each other's support, Brenda and Crystal began to formulate a plan to kill Kendra. They met many times and developed many plans. The original plan was to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then get rid of her. But to avoid being under suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around the scraggliest neighborhoods and asked a few people if they could help. That's how they met Christopher Love. He agreed to help and took an active part in deciding the modus operandi of the crime. The trio unanimously decided that the best way to kill was to shoot him because it was quick. While cooperating, Crystal revealed that the date of September 2nd was not chosen at random. Brenda knew that Kendra and Ricardo were planning a trip to Mexico, so it was decided to get rid of the woman before the happy vacation. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the crime to look like a botched robbery. Next, the criminals chose the location of the massacre. For days, they desperately tracked Kendra's movements and recorded her minute by minute to make sure nothing changed on the appointed day. After work, they traced her route home and figured out how to discreetly enter the apartment complex's secure parking garage. On September 1st, 2015, they made a final check. On the day of the crime, early in the morning, Brenda and Crystal picked up the Jeep from Jose, then picked up Christopher along the way. Brenda was dropped off at the library in Carrollton so she would have an alibi, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex. They waited across the street for about 30 minutes, then drove to Kendra's place of employment. After waiting for their victim, they followed her but lost her in traffic, however. They returned to the house first and waited there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves, approached Kendra with a gun, and shot her when she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she did not actually see the shooting but heard it. Crystal then drove Christopher home, picked up her son from his grandmother on the way, and later met Brenda at Jose's house where she handed him the Jeep. Thus, Brenda's dream came true. She was rid of her hated rival, and all she had to do was wait for her beloved Ricardo's message. Brenda was happy that she had managed to pull off the perfect crime. Crystal's candid confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about Brenda Delgado's guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. But when police officers arrived with the warrant, she was no longer at home. Having dual citizenship, Brenda Delgado fled to Mexico. After fleeing, Brenda's involvement in a contract killing became apparent, and she was put on a wanted list. On April 6, 2016, the FBI placed her on the list of most wanted fugitives, assigning a reward of $100,000 for information about her. So Brenda Delgado became the only woman on the list at the time and the 9th woman on the list ever. But just 2 days later, in Torreon, Coahuila, she was apprehended by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States on October 6, Mexico agreed to extradite Brenda, but only on the grounds that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Brenda was extradited to Texas, and she was brought to trial. Hearings in the case began in 2017. The grief-stricken relatives of Kendra and Ricardo did not hesitate to express themselves during the court appearance. The oil was added to the fire by witnesses who confirmed Brenda's intentions and her dangerous obsession with her former lover. Brenda's cousin, Moses Martinez, spoke in court about his sister's depression after the end of her and Ricky's relationship. He also revealed that Brenda offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He refused to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified at trial that Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo and read all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer revealed that Brenda had asked her to help eliminate the hated Kendra Hatcher too. She also told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something lethal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. For her help, Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car, and illegal drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then refused. It is quite strange that adults, having been offered the suggestion to harm or kill someone, contemplated doing so, and none of them went to the police to report a threat to a person's life or health. The court heard evidence about obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. So the court found that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, and she wanted only one thing: to get back to Ricky. The court received corroboration that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda became increasingly obsessed. As evidence of Brenda's involvement, an ATM withdrawal receipt in the amount of $500, which she subsequently gave to Crystal for doing the work, was presented at the hearing. Christopher Love received a cash payment in the amount of $600. The cell phone data provided also indicated that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together prior to the crime. More than 99 calls were recorded between Brenda and Crystal between August 22 and September 4th, proving their constant communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. The defendant's attorney tried to shift much of the blame to the perpetrators, but it didn't work. The defense argued that Brenda was not at the scene of the crime. She had an alibi and receipts confirming her presence at the restaurant at the time of the crime. Brenda herself did not plead guilty, but the jury thought otherwise. It took them only 30 minutes to find Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Christopher Love, the direct perpetrator of the crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death via injection. Crystal Cortez, in exchange for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty, received a sentence of 35 years in prison with parole eligibility. The family of Kendra Hatcher was satisfied with the court's decision and silently withdrew from the courtroom after the verdict. The Delgado family did not believe to the last that their Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving daughter and woman, healthy and with good family and Christian values. I hope this cautionary tale of female perfidy and mentally unhealthy obsessive love will leave a mark on every woman's soul and serve as a cautionary tale in new love relationships, for no man is worth a human life. Take care of yourself and be careful.